Hi, my name is Rory Canterbury. I'm going to be your host today on Archery Talk 101. And we have a guest on the line. We're going to talk with Mike here in a little bit. But before we get started, I want to let everybody know how you can listen to or watch the podcast. You can listen to it on Audible. Just go out there and search for Archery Talk 101, and you can listen to it free. You can also go out to like Spotify and wherever you listen to normal podcasts. If you'd like to watch the podcast, which is always nice to do, you can go out to Arch Talk 101 Facebook group. That'll be posted in there, as well as if you have questions about archery, it's a great place to post it because we have archers from all different skill levels. We have coaches, we have, from beginners to Olympic archers on there. So we have everybody there. If you have a question, you're not sure what your form looks like, upload it. We'll take a look and give you some pointers. You can also watch it on my YouTube channel, Learn to Fix It Yourself. There I post a lot of archery stuff out there. And, that's kind of where you can watch it and listen to it. And let's get on with the show. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Could you maybe introduce yourself and tell us a little something about you and maybe how you got
Sure.
started in archery?
Yeah. Michael Davenport, Mike Davenport's fine. I've been bow hunting for 36 years. And I started out just like a lot of kids, just, around people who hunted. I didn't really have a lot of mentors in my family so much until later, but I was, just that kid in the neighborhood that was obsessed with the outdoors from an early age. I picked up a bow and shot it, of course, when I was much younger, just fiberglass bows. But really started bow hunting in 1986, which I'm dating myself. I was 16 when I killed my first deer with a bow. And, it's just been an absolute journey that I wouldn't trade for anything. I've hunted all over the world, and I have bow hunted most of my life now, and it's just a privilege to do every single year. I look forward to deer season and spring turkeys, which are going on now, and it's something that lit a fire when I was a young man, and it's still as hot and heavy as ever. And then adding in competition, I'm a big competition archer in addition to being a bow hunter, so I enjoy competing and pushing myself in the competition arena because I think it makes me a better bow hunter. So that's about it on me.
Yeah, I shoot targets to develop my skill, and then I'd shoot 3Ds to develop my hunting skill because the whole goal is to put meat in the freezer.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And the moment of truth when you have an animal in front of you that you're going to kill, when you have put yourself through lots of reps and work. And for me, what the competition, I got into it because I wanted to, as much as I could, stress inoculate. So in a big competition where you're standing there and one arrow matters, there's an upload of information from that. I think your central nervous system, your mental fortitude can get you can really hammer that out and become stronger because of it. So I would say, since I started competing and putting pressure on myself in the competition arena, my ability to make pressure shots on animals has gone way up. So it's something I love them equally. Like I really enjoy hunting, but I really enjoy competing as well.
I know, like the first time I went to a 3D shoot, I hadn't shot any animals with my bow yet, so
Mhm.
I go to a 3D shoot and I'm drawing that first animal. And it's like, yeah, it could have been a real animal.
Yeah,
The nerves kick in and everything else, and we're just shooting foam.
yeah, right.
It's that thought behind there, and then after you do it for a while, then you kind of get used to it and you calm down, and then you get out hunting, and then you're a little bit more calm, and like you said, reps. Get
Yes,
lots of reps in.
yes. And I think there have been big shots I've had to make in competition. I shot for Team USA this summer. I shot in Slovenia in the World 3D Championships, and I had to make a couple of really big shots with a lot of people watching. And your nerves are they're part of the process, and if it ever gets to the point where I'm not a little nervous, then maybe I'm doing the wrong thing, you know. So the same thing with hunting. The day that a little doe comes in that I'm going to kill for my to put meat in the freezer, I don't get a little nervous about it. I'm probably going to have to move on to something else, which I hope that never happens because
Right.
archery is part of who I am, and it you can replicate some of the nerves in a competition, but I would say it's not the same as hunting because you're getting ready to send an arrow through an animal to put meat in the freezer, and foam's just going to stay there. But it's also the best thing you can do, I think, to prepare yourself for that. Do you find that as well? Do you find that shooting 3D helps you prepare for hunting?
Oh yeah, and that was the biggest reason why I like shooting the 3Ds.
Hmm.
Uh, the only thing that I always thought on a 3D shoot for a hunter class, it should be 10, 8, and -5.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I agree with
You
that.
know, because outside that kill zone ring is a bad hit. You have a
Yes,
wounded animal, so it should be -5. And I thought somebody it's like they actually had a shoot where it was that way. You know, where
yes,
you get -5 for hitting foam,
yeah,
and then you get either 8 or 10. You know, if they use a 12 ring or something like that, but you take one bad hit, you normally be 5 points, you're losing five. Well, now you're losing not just the 10 that you would have got, but you're losing an additional five. So you get no points for it and you go in a hole. And that would be a true hunter class.
yeah, I agree. And I think, when you're practicing like that, it adds a little more, maybe just a little more skin in the game because man, if I make a bad shot on this foam, that's a -5, you know. And
Right.
there are lots of fives that I've made through competition that I'm glad to have that five. But if it would have been a -5, ooh man, it's been bad.
Yeah. What one bad shot could take you from first to last.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know,
Yeah,
where
I
where
mean,
a bad shot with a 5 pointer, it might take you first to third, but
yeah.
getting -5 points.
Right. I think it would be a fun competition to do that, especially if you're setting up a hunter class. When you're practicing in the backyard, we're always the king of our own backyard, and you're in the backyard shooting. I think it'd be a good exercise maybe to keep score and say you have if I'm fortunate enough to have a little mini range there at my house, and I probably have 8 or 10 3D targets that I can practice on. I try to only shoot one arrow per target because I think it's easier to grab arrow after arrow and send them versus having that mindset of, okay, I'm only getting one shot here. We tend to stand in one spot a lot of times and we just shoot arrow after arrow after arrow without any mindful execution of the shot. And if I had one tip for anybody, practicing for a hunt, is treat it the same way. Maybe even, I know as season gets closer, I'm usually going to have my hunting gear on. I'm going to be shooting the bow that I'm going to be hunting with, which I hunt with longbows and wood arrows. That's kind of my thing. That's what I compete with. And it's good to have that one arrow mentality. One of my friends and I joke, we call that the starvation arrow. We got one arrow, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I know, just you go to someone and say, "You gonna warm up?" No. I may draw my bow back because I'll do that when I get in the tree. I'll draw it back, make sure, everything is all working, but I don't take practice shots.
Yeah.
First shot counts.
Yeah.
I don't take, a warm up shot and then take a real shot. No. First one
Right.
counts.
Right. I have two thoughts on that. The first is I shoot a lot of cold arrows. So what I'll do is I'll grab my bow and then I'll go to one of my 3D targets, and that's my cold arrow. And I'll make sure that I'm focusing on executing the shot with that cold arrow. Because like you said, when you're on the stand, you're basically, you get that one shot only. Especially if you sat there for 4 or 5 hours and you're cold, a guy ought to be picking his bow up, looking around, making sure, there's not a deer watching you and draw the bow a couple times. So that cold shot is a good thing. The second thing is once you have your cold shot, I think it's okay to, as I get older, I'm finding that I need to do this more, is to get loose, because you can you can shoot three, four, five arrows to loosen up, because then the next thing you're doing, you're actually working on something. And we shoot archery for fun, but we're also
Right.
trying to get mental reps as much as physical reps to know what that feeling is to make a good shot. And there's a dichotomy there, I think, of we all want to be able to make a shot under pressure, but can you make a shot under pressure when you're cold, like you mentioned?
Yeah.
Um, but I do think there's some validity to getting a little looser and getting those reps in that are perfect reps. And the old adage is, practice makes perfect. No, perfect practice makes perfect. Practice
Right.
just gets you better. But if you can stand there and deliver arrow after arrow, um, in mindful control of the shot, and not just flinging arrows, but putting thought into what you're doing, then when it comes time to shoot an animal, and I've thought about this many times. I had an opportunity at one point to kill a mountain goat day 5 into a hunt, and I was cold. It had started snowing. I had to put on a rain jacket and made my last 100 yards to this critter, to this mountain goat up in British Columbia, and I was cold, and I missed it. I missed the goat of a lifetime, and it was partly I'd put on a rain jacket, and I kind of got into my clothing a little bit with my bow, but I think about that a lot. Is like under the conditions. That's why if it's raining, if it ain't raining, we ain't training. Like I'm gonna go out and shoot my bow in the rain because I want to know what I can. If I'm miserable, I want to make sure I can perform when I'm miserable.
Right.
So, there's a training is training. You put forth mental reps in that, but then the flip side of that is you're going to have some if you're doing mountain hunting or even whitetail hunting, you're going to shoot some shots when you're not so comfortable, right?
Right. Yeah. I've had some where I've actually depended on my safety harness to hold me in the tree stand because in order to get the shot off, I had to basically stand at the edge of my tree stand and lean forward
Oh,
until I could, hold the strap and then lean forward. It's like, okay, it's holding me and then take the shot.
yeah.
And yeah, if you've never practiced that, that can be, nerve-wracking where you're trying to depend on the safety harness to hold you in the tree stand. And,
Yeah, for sure. And
you know,
I
I
think that I think that there's something to be said for putting on your hunting gear and shooting, and then when once the season starts, continue to shoot. Continue to practice. I I have seen, and I've done it myself, where as the weather gets a little colder, you don't want to be out there shooting in the cold, but you just make yourself do it because you want to know what you're. If you've not practiced that shot, for instance, what you mentioned, then when it comes time to make the shot, do you want to really be doing that when an animal's in front of you and you've never used that technique? Sounds like you had practiced that before, right?
Yeah, there's a few times, and it just makes it easier and you lean out there and even if you're not making a shot, just getting used to where you're comfortable, letting that harness hold you into the tree stand. And
Yeah,
um,
yeah, that's right.
wearing the proper harness is definitely important. I had a few episodes back where I actually did one on tree stand safety.
Hmm.
And I actually interviewed the Nebraska Game and Parks tree stand safety guys, like an hour and a half worth of talking with them. And it's amazing all the stuff we need to do, all the safety we need to do. So, um, you know,
Yeah.
take a look
I,
at, listen to that one because I don't want to, cover the whole thing again here. But yeah, it's definitely something you need to practice getting in and get out of your tree stand. If you do fall, how are you going to recover?
right. And I've actually had an accident in 2011. Went with a buddy hunting. He sent me to a stand that had been hung. I didn't know when it had been hung. I was just anxious to get there because it was a good farm. And I get to the stand, and back then I was using safety harness just like I do now, but I wasn't staying attached to the tree. I used the screw-in steps to go up, got on the platform, and was putting the safety harness around the tree, and the stand broke, and I ended up with some pretty bad injuries. So making sure you have a safety harness. I really got into last year. I really got into saddle hunting a little bit, and and I use a platform for that. And the reason I wanted to do it is I wanted to be more portable, but I like the safety factor with the saddle because you have alignment belt as you're going up the tree, and then you have a tether that's attached to you as you're leaning. And the first few times I was in that thing, you're talking about leaning off a stand. I had a difficult. It was a trust issue for me. It's like, okay, am I going to lean back here? But it is really. I've learned that it is very safe, and after my accident in 2011, I was very fortunate. I didn't have more injuries than what I did, and I work in healthcare, so I knew how bad the injuries could have been, and so I was very fortunate. But having a good safety harness and more importantly, practice your system. Practice
Right.
putting your stand if you're using a hang-on stand and your sticks, making sure you practice that. You don't want to be doing that in the middle of deer season, trying to figure out how your steps work or how your climbing
Right.
stand works. There's some. It doesn't hurt this time of year to you know use that equipment and get used to it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we covered in the um, that course. When I was talking to the safety guys is, practice hanging off of them because one of the things that he brought up is your safety harness can be holding you, but it cuts the circulation off to the blood to your legs if you don't
Yeah,
have some way relief it releases,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then it builds up in acid, and then once you get the blood flowing again, you have a heart attack.
yeah, exactly. Or a pulmonary embolus. You
Right.
throw a clot. Yeah. So having a relief system, like a lot of the safety harnesses have they sell also like a band that you can use to attach. The other old thing I used to do is I'd have a screw and step in my pocket. So if I'm hanging from say I had it in my left cargo pocket. So if I'm hanging from my safety harness, I can take my screw and step and work it into the tree, get my foot on it, and take some relief off of those legs because it does cause a tamponade effect of the femoral arteries. So you basically just don't have any blood flow and it all clots. And the minute you take the pressure away, doesn't always happen, but there's a very good chance you're going to throw a clot, and it's a bad deal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely something that you need to plan on. And then one of the things that he did was he had extra carabiners and on a rope, like have just carry some extra ones. I
Yeah,
think I got these three at Cabela's. They're like $30 or something like that for three real carabiners that you can use. And it makes it nice because then you can, um, use those with a rope and you can stand up on them and stuff like that.
yeah.
And then um, you can relieve your pressure on them. And then we actually went over a process that you can actually descend down your lifeline.
Yeah.
And what it basically, it's fairly simple, but if you haven't ever done it, and it takes a long time because you're on about 6 inches at a time.
Right, right. Well, the main thing is, being able to descend safely without hanging there. There's been so many accounts of people, they find them in the tree and they didn't fall, but they basically cut off the circulation. So what we do is not, I mean, it is absolutely not easy, being in being in a hunting situation and not having had practice your safety equipment is ludicrous. It's like if I'm going to the mountains and I'm going to go elk hunting on a solo elk hunt. I do that. I usually do that every other year. Try to take a week and just do a solo elk. Just try to go and do it myself and on public ground. But you better know how to. The other safety factors. You better know how to build a fire. You build a shelter. I mean, it's the same thing. You want to make sure you're able to get out of that tree safely and get back to your family, and or get off the mountain safely and get back to your family.
Well, and one of the things they brought up that I hadn't really thought about is, where we normally keep our phone in
Yeah,
our chest pocket or our back pocket. If you're
yeah,
hanging from a harness, you can't get to it.
right.
So it's always, and you always have the cargo pants. Always leave it in an outside pocket that you can get to while you're hanging off your safety stand,
Yep,
your safety harness.
yep. For me,
And
my cell phone's always in my right cargo pocket, and I have a screw-in step in my left cargo pocket. So that way, I've got a way to relieve pressure here, and I've got a way to get to my phone there. So that's a good plan. And just having a plan. So many times you think about growing up hunting, and so many times you go to the woods and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot that, I forgot that. But I can't. I got a really funny story about forgetting a flashlight. If when we get to that part, I'll tell you. But you want to make sure you got all your gear, and better have your cell phone where you can get to it. That's for sure.
yeah, I always used to carry way too much stuff. My backpack was, I don't know, 30 pounds or better,
Right.
because, I'd have a couple knives in it. I have a flashlight in it. I'd have, uh, an extra rope with hooks on the end of it. I'd have, when you're sitting down, I'd have the little boot covers. As I'm walking in or out, my bibs and my heavy coat are on the backpack because if I wear them going in, I'm sweating by the time I
Oh
get
yeah.
there. No
Yeah.
matter how cold it is, I can't walk with them in there. So I'm carrying those and I got binoculars and extra releases and calls and gloves and a couple of things, a couple of these liter bottles of water and first aid kit, some fire starters, um, so I've got stuff I can start fires with and everything. I've got all the stuff I need for that kind of stuff, and that's all something you want to carry. And some of the things that I started looking at carrying, some of the fire starters like the a char cloth,
Hmm.
and char cloth is just a little piece of old jeans. Cut them up, and then you put them in an Altoids can,
Yeah.
and then when you got a fire going, put them in the fire. It'll burn off all the color off of it, and then you want to take it out of the fire. Once it stops smoking, and don't open it up until it cooled completely off. And then now that char cloth, one little spark will ignite it.
Oh wow. That's pretty cool.
You can take the spark from a cigarette lighter that don't have any fluid in it.
Yeah.
They'll spark.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've
That's enough to light one. I won't
exactly.
do it here because I'm not in a place where I could let it burn.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm I'm in my office, so there's nothing I would set it on. I'd let it to burn.
I also I take Vaseline and put it on cotton balls and put it in a little film canister or a little um, any kind of container, small container, and you can light that with a ferro rod pretty easy. You just one strike of the ferro rod and it'll light. The other thing that'll light is Fritos. Fritos are mainly
Oh,
fat. You can
yeah,
actually light a Frito and it'll burn. And at least you could get some tender to it. Not that I'm toting Fritos when I'm. It's not my snack of choice when I'm hunting, but
no.
just something to keep in mind.
The other thing that works good is I actually did a video on this a couple of years ago. Dryer lint.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah,
Pull the dryer lint out, and I actually have some in here. But I did one where I had the dryer lint. That's just lint from the dryer,
yep,
and it'll take a spark and ignite.
yes,
It's
it will.
basically cotton and stuff, and it'll all burn.
Yep,
Uh,
you could pack it down to a little of nothing in a Ziploc and put it in
yeah,
there. That's the two things I carry. I carry Vaseline, cotton balls soaked in Vaseline in a film canister and dryer lint and a ferro rod, and then a lighter. Two is one, one is none type thing for fire starter. Those are
right.
the things that I carry where I'm in the mountains or on my back 40. It never hurts to be able to start a fire. I was in British Columbia on another hunt and fell in a on the climb down. I fell into a pretty cold creek, just lost my footing, and we still had 3 miles left to the truck, and it was just not going to be good. That's a good way to get hypothermia because it was
Right.
cold. So that's what we did. We just built me a fire and built a little shelter there until I got warm enough where I felt like I could make the 3 mile hike out. But there's nothing more miserable than just teeth chattering cold and not having a fire. So if you got a way to start a fire, you're ahead of the game.
Oh yeah. And there's, another thing we did, quite a while ago, I think when I was in Scouts, get the strike anywhere matches, the fishing
Yes,
matches. And,
yes,
and those are really good.
yeah. I mean, all those things are. I did an overnight. I did a 2 day survival course many years ago, and that was kind of the guy who taught it was the Air Force colonel who taught part of the SEER program, and he was a wealth of knowledge. But his whole thing about staying out all night is being able to stay warm and stay dry. So we spent a lot of time how to build a little lean-to shelter, use a tarp, garbage bag, whatever you got, and then being able to start a fire. And there's something from a mental perspective too. If you're lost and lonely, when you can build a fire, there's something soothing about that psychologically as
Right.
well.
Well, like I said, on the strike anywhere matches, take some string and tie it around it with a little bit of string on it and dip it in wax,
Yep.
like candle wax. And now it's coated. Water won't get in it because it's coated in wax, and you strike enough and it'll burn. And that wax, also there you've got, basically a candle that'll burn for a long time. And
Yeah.
they got other fire starters you can carry, but you know,
There's a ton of them
those
out there. I think the idea is just there's a ton of them out there. Just practice with them and have a method that in the most inhospitable weather you can strike. You can get a fire going. That's the main thing. And I've tried with like for a while there I was on a Bushman kick. I was like I have a friend, a guy named Clay Hayes. I don't know if you're familiar with Clay, but he was on alone and his bushcraft skills are top of the, I mean, just unreal. Just the guy is amazing and is a great bow hunter too. And, you know, the, the ability to start a fire when everything's wet, you're wet. It goes a little farther maybe than if we're just doing a hunt on a piece of ground close to home. But some of these whitetail hunts where you're, going to walk in a long ways on public, those you might snap a leg back there and have to build a fire until you can get the cavalry to come get you. So it's a good skill to have for sure.
yeah, the more you know about surviving, the easier it is if you do have a problem. And
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
always nice to have extra stuff with you. The only problem is you have all that extra weight to carry. But
Yes,
you know,
that's why having two methods that you're pretty comfortable with, I think is important because we all carry. I'm sure we just went over, what was in your kit. I've noticed as I've gotten older on my mountain hunts, my pack gets lighter and lighter, and I don't know if it's part of it is my legs are just don't I don't have the legs that I did, but I've also learned a thing or two, and with technology, back, when I first started, it was a 7 pound sleeping bag. That was kind of the standard. If you had a 7 pound sleeping bag and a 7 pound tent, you were in good shape. Now you can get a shelter and a bag under 5 pounds. So it's definitely lighten the load, but take what you need. You know, I think you could overdo it. I've certainly been on whitetail hunts where I hiked in and looked at my pack because I was going to stay all day and went, gosh, I could stay a week out here with the crap I brought.
yeah, yeah,
And it,
yeah,
have
and a
you
lot of times
used,
you can get food and stuff while you're out there. So
yeah, exactly. And I've done that before where I was up, I had a small game license and I was elk hunting and I was out of freeze dried food and there were some bunnies around and I wanted to stay one more night on the mountain. I was into elk. So it was like, I could shoot that bunny and eat pretty good tonight. So that's what I did.
Yeah,
Yeah, I always find food. I like foraging too, so you can find some pretty neat stuff, anywhere really. But I think it's another good skill to have is what you're going to eat if you run out of food. If you're 8 miles from somewhere and you don't have any comms or you hurt yourself, having that other skill set's good too.
yeah, definitely worth learning.
Absolutely. It's like
So,
sharpening. I was talking to a kid the other day about broadheads. A young guy was asking me what broadhead I used, and I told him, I've always really liked ace broadheads, which are a traditional broadhead. They're easy to sharpen, and I spend a lot of time getting my broadheads super sharp. But it's a skill to learn, and it's something that I want them shaving sharp. I want to be able to shave with them when I go out. I was talking to this young bow hunter about that, and I asked him, do you sharpen your own broadheads? And he said, nah, he's usually buy them and they're pretty sharp. I'm like, well, that's okay. I said, but maybe it's a skill you pick up just in case. You put a broadhead in a quiver a bunch of times, you get it dull. Maybe that's another skill that you can put on your to-do list as a bow hunter. Getting stuff sharp, whether it's your hunting knives or whether it's your broadheads. Hunt sharp at all times.
right. Well, it's the dull knife that hurts you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I was just working on some drywall. I told you earlier on my house that I got a dull knife that I was using, and I thought, man, I need to change this blade out because this is the best way to cut myself is have this dull knife skip, or you're field dressing an animal with a dull knife and it skips off something that should have cut and it cuts you. I've done that before where you look down and you field dress an animal and you realize you cut your finger and you're like, well, is that my blood or the deer's blood?
Yeah, because sometimes they're really sharp. You don't feel it right away.
Yeah, right. If you're doing it right, yeah. It's like when you're using my one of my favorite things to skin a backstrap with is an old Rapala fillet knife, really thin blade, and I like taking the silver skin off the backstrap when I'm cleaning up my animals, and that knife is so sharp. But there's been a time or two where it like nicked me, and it's like, did I cut myself? And then you look and you're like, well, yeah, I did. That's a good sharp knife right there.
Well, and I do that on the back straps is, once I get ready to do them, I use a fillet knife as well and fillet
Yeah,
that all off and, comes off really nice and makes it nice and clean. And, there's no membranes to get in the way. It's pretty much pure meat. And,
yeah.
that's what's
There's
nice about the deer.
yeah, for sure. I was I had another conversation. I went to a archery tournament 2 weeks ago and spent the weekend there, and we were sitting around a campfire talking about the best meals we've ever had in our life. And I said, well, the best meal I ever had in my life was around a campfire like this. I had banged up my knee really bad. I played college basketball, so I've had a bunch of knee surgeries. The two guys I was hunting with, we were making some pretty hard climbs to get up to where the elk were, and I couldn't make the climb that day. So I just went and sat on a water hole, and the most beautiful fat cow elk walked in there, and I made a great shot on it, and was able to field dress her. And I just opened it. I just opened her up so that I could let her cool off and got the guts out. But I took the internal fillets, which on an elk are 8 inches. Those internal tenderloins, took them back to camp and was cooking it on an open fire. And the guys were coming off the mountain. I could see their headlamp coming off the mountain. And I was just sitting there cooking that food, and they got down to camp, and they were like, "We knew you killed an elk because we could smell elk all the way up the mountain." You know, I'm like, I'm like, yeah, yeah, I did, and it was those internal tenderloins on any animal, deer doesn't matter, but on an elk they're fairly large, so it fed three hungry hunters that night, that's for sure.
I know like that's kind of slimmer. The best cut of meat I've ever had was um, I killed a deer, pulled out the tenderloins inside,
Right.
and then fired up the grill and set on. Now on a deer, they're not that big, but I set
Yeah.
them both on there, and they're cooking. You're gonna roll a bit. The tip, yeah, because always get thinner at the tips. So I
Right.
take my knife and my fork and I cut it off, and I'm eating the tips. I'm eating it in from the outside in as it's getting ready. It's like, oh man, that was just so good.
Yeah, it really is good. And I have learned, I'm a cook. I enjoy making good dishes from wild game. And I've got several cookbooks that I go by, and there's several great outdoor chefs. But there's nothing more gratifying than taking a deer you've killed or an elk you've killed or a bear or whatever and turning it into good food. And there's just I call it an honest plate. I love it whenever it's in the early fall or just fall, and you can look down and there are vegetables on your plate that you had in your garden, and then there's a big hunk of meat from a white-tailed deer that you took, and it's an honest plate, and there's nothing like it really. I don't think there's any better food for you on the planet,
No.
and personally, I just haven't had any meat anywhere that tastes any better than a good whitetail backstrap. That's about as good as it gets.
Yeah, that's really good. And you just need to learn how to cook. For one thing, there's no fat in them, so you don't cook them well done.
Yeah, for
Most of your
sure.
meat should be cooked medium rare at best anyway.
Right.
And I cook them end up being a little bit rare and had to put them back on a little bit. But you overcook them, and it's like I don't want to eat them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and that's
I'd rather have them a little raw.
yeah, well I think that's the key too, is that when people have tried deer and they said deer tasted bad or they didn't like it, there's been so many times in my life where people said, I'm not going to eat that deer meat. And I'm like, just let me cook it for you. I had my sister-in-law, for instance, she was not going to eat any deer meat at all. And I did a backstrap, medium rare, pan seared, and I made a sauce for it with a little bit of red wine and olive oil, and made a little sauce to go over the top of it. And I said, you just have to try it. And if you think if this tastes bad, then I'll never ask you again. Since that time, she's driven me crazy about getting her some deer meat because it's just people just have a misconception when it comes to wild game that and you just can't. If you overcook it, it's going to be bad. And the other thing too is, like you said, they don't have a lot of fat in them. So maybe you cook with a little bit more olive oil and add a little more oil to it if you want a little more oil or butter to it, and just don't complicate the dish. A lot of times with good wild game, it's fire, salt, pepper, and a little bit of thyme, and it's going to be great. And whether you do like the shank of the deer, for instance, everyone uses that and either throws it away or tries to grind it up. You can take the shank of a white-tailed buck, the biggest white-tailed buck you could think of, and take the shank and braise it in liquid over about 5 hours at 325 in the oven. You basically submerge it in stock with vegetables, and it turns into the most beautiful pot roast. And it's the throwaway pieces, and it just is a fantastic dish. If you ask my son what his favorite, besides backstrap, what his favorite dish that I make, it's braised shank, whether it's bear, which I've done it with bear, elk. I even shot a moose in British Columbia, and I did not want to pack off any bones because it was a long pack, but I did bring out the front shank, even though they probably weighed 20 pounds a piece. But I brought them out because I had this vision of what I wanted to do with that piece of meat. I wanted to make a dish called ossobuco, which is cross section cut of the forearm, and there's marrow in the middle and a nice meat donut, and you braise it just like you would the shank I was talking about, and it's a beautiful dish, very elegant dish, and it's an old moose that was eating stuff in a river bottom.
Yeah, I think moose is probably my best meat.
You
I,
enjoy it the
I, I
most?
got a, yeah, I got a moose when I was up in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
and it was, I thought there was nothing better than that. I thought, whitetail is good, but moose is even much better. And I haven't had much elk or caribou, but those are supposed to be really good as
Yeah.
too. But that moose was really good.
I liked the moose a lot. I was able to drive up there. I drove back 400 pounds of moose meat. I made a point. It was a 32-hour drive, but I was adamant that I wanted to bring home every morsel because I was doing a mountain goat and moose hunt, and I was going to be gone 2 weeks, and I wanted to be sure that I could get all that meat back. So I brought back 400 pounds of moose meat and butchered it all myself, and it was quite the chore to do. I think I ended up with 200 pounds of ground and 200 pounds of other cuts. And it was, to me, it was very good. The moose I killed was really old. The meat was good, but I would say I would rank our whitetails in the Midwest, because I live in Southern Illinois. I would rank our whitetails as far as meat goes up there with anything I've had. I've had kudu, I've had other African game. I've had, elk and moose. But our whitetails, whether it's their diet or it's just that I just enjoy that meat the most, I would probably pick it hands down. And then maybe elk, then maybe moose for me. But, to each their own. We're all hunters. We're not going to turn down any real meat anyway, right?
No. Well, and I had a cow too. So
Okay.
if you have an old bull or something, those are going to be a little bit, not as good a meat as the cow. And
Yeah.
so I was lucky I had a cow tag. So I got a
That's
nice
good.
big cow. And
Yeah, cow elk. The difference for me, like shooting a bull moose, it was pretty tough. So I had to be creative in how I cooked it. The flavor was fantastic, but I've killed several cow elk now, and it's that's some of the best meat on the planet too. And I think the last one I killed my longbow. I think it was 5 years ago, and it was a big, healthy cow. You can get, I mean, you're looking at a 200-pound meat yield off a big animal like that, and it's kind of
yeah,
great, because that's like shooting three whitetails. You're getting
yeah,
a ton of meat off of it. And the care of the meat in the field, I think, is also when people talk about the wild game not tasting good. I think so many times people shoot animals, they'll shoot a big buck and they'll drive around with their in the back of their truck for a day and a half and then wonder why the meat tasted bad. It's like,
yeah,
well, maybe if you took care of it. Same thing with antelope. I know that a lot of folks out west don't enjoy antelope meat, and I just love it. I think it's a fantastic table fare. And I had, I shot an antelope. I shot a couple of antelope, but the one I shot on a water hole with my bow was I had an antlerless tag, and man, I had that thing in the cooler in 20 minutes. And that turned out to be some of the best meat I've ever had. I mean, I would also rank that up there too. Antelope is a really nice, pretty meat, like a very light meat. And but a lot of folks don't like it out west. I don't know if it's just maybe they get used to there's so many of them out there, but I certainly like them.
yeah. It's like you mentioned, the key is how quick do you get it gutted and cooled.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the key right there is get it cooled off as quick as you can and gutted.
yeah. I shot my moose and right at dark, and we were in grizzly country naturally, and we had to get to the moose and field dress. We knew we couldn't pack it out that night. We knew we couldn't butcher it that night because it was a half a day process. But we knew we could get to it and field dress it to cool it off. And a lot of people do a gutless method when they skin animals, but we didn't have a chance. We had to get the gut side of that thing. So the amount of heat that gets put off by not gutting an animal, I am a big believer in field dressing an animal if you at all possible to do. And that moose that night, I mean, it was putting off steam. We propped it open with sticks and tried to get the as cool as we can. But even though it got down into the 40s that night, I think it was in the 40s. Yeah, water wasn't froze, so it was still a little warm that next morning. So man, just that's a biggie for me is when you know an animal's down. I always take a second to thank God for the opportunity and thank the animal, and then show respect. But as soon as that's over with, a quick photo and let's get going here. Because that inevitably what happens is that meat is a valuable commodity the minute it hits the ground. And for me
Right.
personally, it's why I hunt. I got a trophy room full of stuff. But if people ask me why I hunt, it's because I like to eat what I shoot. That's the main thing.
Well, you know where it come from. You know as how it's processed, and
Yeah.
that's why I always did all my own. I did my moose myself. It took me a while because I was working full time, but it took me about 5 days to get it all cut up. So but it's been on ice the whole time.
Yeah.
And I could
Yeah.
definitely tell a little color change between when I first started and about 4 or 5 days later, it got a little bit darker.
Yeah.
It aged a little bit, and I wasn't intending on aging it, but it was fine because it
Yeah.
was kept cold, and that way I know exactly how it was prepared, how it was kept.
Yes.
It's cut in the size and that I want, and the quantities in the package that I want, to
Right.
feed the family. And now because it's just the two of us, I don't need as many in a package. But when
Right.
you got three kids and either five people you're feeding, and all my kids, they liked the venison and they knew where it come from, and so they weren't squeamish. Like, I come home and clean it, it's like dairy shot. It's like, this is it. It's good, isn't it? And they say, yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome. My kids, I've got pictures of my kids helping me butcher and knowing where their food comes from. I think it's important, and it's I take great pride in that. Very few times have I used a processor. I typically just say I know where it came from. I know who handled it, and like you said, you can package up. I'll even write little notes on my when I used to wrap everything, and then now I vacuum seal everything. But I'll write myself a note like if it's like the really middle part of the back strap because I don't cut my back straps up. I cut them in pieces about 12 inches, and that way I can do with whatever I want to. But if it's an exceptionally nice piece, I'll even make myself a note like special, like don't don't serve this to the in-laws. Like just serve
right.
it. If you're going to cook something nice for your wife, this was the piece you want to use. But yeah, I think it's just one of those things that growing up and learning how to hunt almost organically for me, I always took great pride in the food aspect of it. We didn't have my situation growing up. We were a single mom and three kids, and we didn't have a lot. And I started hunting, because I loved it. But then I started realizing the importance of what I was doing because our protein consumption started going up as I started hunting, and it was because we were putting food in the freezer, whether it was squirrels and rabbits or whitetails or ducks, whatever. But it is a valuable commodity. Let's just say that.
And you don't have to worry about, the meat being bad or anything, and all these recalls on the food, and you don't have that because you know how it was treated. The vegetables you go in the garden,
Yeah,
you can't beat them. Like
yeah,
tomatoes,
right.
that sort of thing. You go to a restaurant and tomatoes are pink at best.
Yeah,
And then they get the what they call the vine ripened ones. And actually,
right.
this on one of my videos talk about, you know, I was cutting some off, I cut them off, and I said, now if I cut this off green and they turn ripe, it's still vine ripened because it's
Right,
still on the vine.
right,
Because
right.
they pick them all green and let them ripen, and
Yeah.
you can see how they're really pink and stuff. No, mine are completely ripe on the vine before I pick them, and they're completely different color. They're dark red, and
Oh yeah.
the flavor's much different because you go to restaurants and they put tomato and you taste it. There's no tomato flavor in them.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's nothing like that summertime barbecue where you're cooking something really good on the grill, a deer steak or an elk steak. You go out to your garden, you got several ripe tomatoes, you get those out, and that to me when you get to like July, when you're getting, really good tomatoes, really good vegetables out of the garden, mating that with some of that precious protein is, man, there's nothing better. There's just nothing better. I
Yeah.
always say that's my death row meal. What is your death row meal? Last meal, it would be like backstrap, some tomatoes out of the garden, maybe some green beans out of the garden. Maybe some wild morels fried on the side. That would be okay. That would be my that'd be
Yeah.
you could send me to the happy hunting ground after that, I think.
Yeah, it's good food, and then you learn how to, cook it. When I first started hunting, one deer would last our family a whole year.
Yeah.
We didn't really know how to cook it or anything else. And, then it started getting a bit more and more. And then one year my freezer was basically full and I shot another deer and we basically made jerky out of the whole thing. And I think it might have lasted a week and a half. The whole deer
Yeah.
was ate up. I did the back straps and everything went into jerky.
Oh
And
no.
we had a beef brisket marinade that we'd use, get out of Texas someplace and we'd soak them in that and stick them in the dehydrator. Wasn't the fan in it. It was American Harvester was the brand, but
Yeah.
um, it had the fan in it.
Okay.
Now
Yep.
Cabela's has one with the fan in it, and that works so much better.
Oh yeah.
um,
Oh yeah.
and the kids is like, "Is it ready yet? It's ready yet?" No, it takes more than a couple hours to do it. So as soon as they get ready, we'd pull them off. I'd start another batch, and then start eating that before the next batch is done. They've got that eaten up, and yeah, going through a whole
That's
deer in a couple weeks just making jerky out of it.
That's great. That's great. Well, and you get to, I mean, that's one of those things that you almost have to hide the jerky. Like if I make a big batch of jerky, I'll you know, seal it up, put it off to the side, and then I'll try to put it in strategic places, because it's going to keep forever because especially if you vacuum seal it, and I'll freeze it too, and then I'll put it under some stuff so that as I'm going through the freezer, a packaged jerky will pop out, and I'll be like, oh, okay. So it's playing hide and go seek with with food in the house.
Yeah, otherwise it goes really quick. But
Oh yeah,
they like it, they like it. I never tried to hide it. Then after you go through the whole deer, then they kind of slow down on the jerky by the time you get towards the
yeah,
end. Because they've had it for every day pretty much. They've
right.
had more jerky, and it makes it nice. That way you can do them however you want. And I've taken and made like pepperoni sticks. Um,
Hmm.
I didn't use it in the casing, but I spread it out on some wax paper and then froze it. Then was able to pull those off and just pull those out and go from there. But
Yeah,
that's how I made them was I made them up and then you get them all ready and then freeze them
yeah.
individually like that, and that makes it nice, and then you don't have to because I didn't want to get all the casings and go through all that mess and put them in there. I've done that before, but it's kind of
Pretty
a
time consuming, right?
yeah. When you can just take the thing and shoot it out on a tray, and then you smoke it or cook however you want to do it, and then you just stick them in the freezer and then pull them in another baggie, and as long as it's not in a refrigerator freezer, it'll last a long time.
Yeah,
Otherwise they end up sticking together.
yeah, yeah,
But then if put wax paper in between them, so you don't have to worry about them sticking. And
yeah. I may have to try that. That sounds good.
yeah, and then making like breakfast sausage and stuff. We have a place here that does butcher supply. So you can go get all the seasonings and you can get the great big machines that, the commercial guys use, but I never had anything that big. But, you can
Yeah,
go get all the different seasonings and all the mixes, for the pepperoni and the sausages and,
yeah.
all that kind of stuff. And, that made really good stuff. And we like the jerky made with the Claude's is the name of the sauce.
Quads.
Yeah, Claude's. And the first time I had it was my cousin made it for my other cousin's wedding. And I said, "Oh man, this is good. What is it? Get off It's just regular roast beef, And it's like, no, show what it is like. So we had to have some and ordered them in and, getting like gallon jugs because it's going through so much of it. And now they have some of the local stores carry it. So I don't have to
Oh, that's
order it
good.
from Texas. I
That's
can't
good.
remember where it was at, Austin or someplace like that. It's someplace in Texas we ordered them from.
Well, they
But
know how to do brisket. They know how to do brisket in Texas. Let me tell you.
yeah, yeah. But that made it really good, and um, it was a good sauce. You know, you always have to find some recipes that you like, and I've tried those box mixes,
Hmm.
but I was never really fond of them too much. They work
Yeah.
really good, but I just didn't really care that much for the jerky made from those.
There's a chef named Hank Shaw. He has several books out, but one of my favorites that he does all wild game, and it's Buck Buck Moose is the name of the book, and some unreal table fare recipes. But he has a jerky recipe in there that is really really good. He's a big believer in using Instacure for his jerky, and that way less likely to get any type of GI bug from it. But um, those that's one of the chefs that I really think a lot of because he's able to take food and to take wild game and turn it into great food. But his jerky recipe is excellent in there. He's got several recipes that are, and I think you can go to his website if I'm not mistaken. I think it's Hunter Gardener Gatherer Cook. I might have butchered that, but it's Hank Shaw is the is the chef, and he has some great jerky recipes. You might look at those just, and there's also a sausage recipe I think too. He's a big believer in and he really likes to make like linked sausage. So whether it's a bratwurst or just a regular what he would consider summer sausage, but it's a pretty good resource for a cook.
Well, I actually brought the website up. Let's see if we can do it. Yeah, right there. He's got it, the book Buck Buck Moose,
Yep.
and it looks like it's 26 bucks is all. It's on
Yeah.
sale, normally 30 bucks.
Yeah.
Um,
He does several. One is let's see, Duck Goose is the other one. If you like to duck hunting and that type of thing, and then he's got one on small game. Cottontails or whatnot. It's a great resource as a cook, as a hunter. So I rip him off all the time. If I cook something really good, it usually is going to come from one of his recipes, either something that I've done and made a variant of it, but he does a really good job of presentation and
yeah,
his his approach isn't just the typical. He does a lot of kind of more of an exotic kind of multicultural approach to food. So there's some Chinese dishes in there. There's some German. There's a really good German shank recipe with using sauerkraut of all things. I think it's Austrian braised shanks is the recipe that I like out of there. So it'd be a good resource for any hunter, especially if you're talking about turning it into food.
yeah. It's like I was browsing through the website. Those watching, you can see they got Duck Duck Goose. They got Hunter Gatherer Cookbook.
Hmm.
They got Small Game Magic. Um, I'm not sure that one is here, but this one here is Waste Nothing. Looks like a meat pie of some kind,
Yeah.
and then the Buck Buck Moose, and then Hook, Line, and Supper.
Yeah.
And I eat, therefore I
Fishing.
hunt.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and what's it? Elevate your game. So there's a lot of different ones out there, and yeah, I'll have to check them out. But
Yeah.
I will leave a link in the description to his website, and then that way, you don't have to try to remember what it was. It's huntgathercook.shop is where we're at here. I thought it went to .com, but I'll leave a link to this in there. That way you can find it, and because if it's that good, then
Yeah.
hey,
It's great.
let's start checking it out. And if he's got that good of stuff, then let's support him.
Yeah. Heck yeah. He does a good job with he does some web stuff too, which is any of those guys that are taking what we like to do from a hunting perspective and turning it into good food, I'm going to pay attention to because that's you know I think we have these. You go through these stages as a hunter. I know I did where I wanted to kill the biggest buck and the big moose and a bear, and I had all these. And then what's funny is it started out as putting food on the table. Then, not that I ever turned into a full-fledged trophy hunter, but I was all about. I mean, it was still very valuable food-wise. But then now it's back to, man, I want to kill something so that I can eat it. I want to make
Right.
sure that it's going to be, and so people like Hank Shaw do a really good job of taking what we love and turning it into gourmet food.
Yeah, and that's always, when I first started, trying to cook them, I had no clue how to cook them. So you go through and you overcook them, and now I have more tendency to undercook quite a ways, and it's like, okay, I need to put it back on because it's still raw,
Yeah,
and so I'd rather do that than have it overcooked because
yeah,
it gets tough and it doesn't taste good, and to me it's almost like tasting like liver.
yeah, and you certainly don't want that. I mean, especially if you're cooking for someone else. We don't want our food to taste bad at all. But there's a lot of times I'm entertaining people, and they're eating wild game for the first time, and I want to make sure that I do it right. I want to make sure that the flavors are there. I want it to be something that they've never really had before. They've had the flour and fry it version of it, but I want to be able to cook something. I know recently, my daughter loves like Korean food, and she said something about she had a craving for a Korean bowl, and I'm like, okay, fine. So I went and I made a Korean bowl with using, I think it was just the one of the roasts that I had, and turned it, pickled some vegetables and made a Korean bowl for her. And I, of course, ripped off Hank Shaw, the guy that we
Right.
just looked at, but we made a Korean bowl, and she's like, "Dad, this is one of the best things I've ever had in my life." I'm like, "Well, I'm glad because you can take wild game and turn it into just beautiful food." So
Right.
I think I
Yeah.
think it's I think it's great. I think it's great if people were to get on Hank's website and support him, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, and we'll get them out there, and I know I'm gonna want to get a couple of those books, at least the
Yeah,
Buck Moose, because I do more of that stuff. But
right.
even even the recipes in there, if you have beef, you can still do the same recipe.
Absolutely. Yeah.
A little bit
Yeah.
different flavor because the beef instead of the deer, but
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there are lots of times where, if I'm looking for something, I did a beef Wellington not too long ago, but it wasn't beef. I used the backstrap off a whitetail and made a Wellington out of it. And, it's as good or better than any beef Wellington I ever had.
oh yeah. Well, and lots of times you go to restaurants and they just don't know how to cook a steak, or you get it
Yeah.
and you're paying all this money for it, and you start chewing it, and then okay, I got to spit that crap out, and get the flavor out of it and spit the rest of it
Right.
out, and you chew and spit the rest of it out, and it's like,
Right.
just give me a hamburger.
That's easier, right?
Yeah, it's like easier to eat, and end up not throwing half of it away, and I know one time we went to a place supposed to be known for their steaks, and my wife ordered a steak and it was overcooked. So back to then another one, overcooked.
Uh,
Then another one, third one's overcooked. We said, forget it.
just give me a hamburger.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they said we would use the thermometer. Well, by the time the thermometer says it's cooked, it's overcooked.
For
Because it
sure.
keeps cooking until they get it to you.
I had an opportunity to work with a world renowned chef. It was a friend's birthday party, and he was coming to cook specifically for this friend who was his friend as well. He's a retired chef, just a great guy, and he asked me to go. And of all the things he had me cook, it was the most nerve wracking piece. It was a beautiful piece of beef, tenderloin that we had to go put. I had to go cook it on the egg, and he said, "Now you don't bring this back into me until it's 125." But not 126 and not 124. He had a specific temperature that he wanted that thing brought in because he knew it was going to finish. So if you bring it in at 125, it's going to finish around 140, which is where he wanted it.
Right.
And he had it to a science. I mean, I literally stuck the thermometer in it. It hit 125. I walked in the house. I put it on the plate. He stuck a thermometer in it, and it had gone up by 2 degrees. He said, "That's perfect." And we just let it rest for 5 minutes, and then we stuck the thermometer in there, and it was at the temperature we wanted. So you certainly can overcook good deer meat or good wild game, good meat. Period.
Right.
The What's the old adage? How do you cook a good steak? Well, you start with a good piece of meat. Don't
Right.
You're not just cooking crap. It's good meat.
Well, and then you need to let it rest. I think is what, half the cook time.
Yeah, well, you need to let it cook. You need to let it rest for. I'm gonna walk around a little bit if you don't mind.
No,
Um,
no problem.
you need to let it rest for a good. I mean, most times you want 5 minutes. 5 minutes of time to just let it sit and rest. Some chefs, there's a friend of mine named Monty Browning, who's I don't know if you know Monty. He's a legend when it comes to hunting. At one time, Monty had the world record brown bear and the world record Cape buffalo, but he's a phenomenal chef too. On top of it, and so he's big on letting it rest. Just cook it, just let it rest. Don't be in a huge hurry. So many people cook something and they just throw it on the plate and say, "Oh, it's done." No, it's not done until it's rested for a few minutes.
Yeah, and if you cut it too quick, then all the juices come out, and then it dries it
Yeah, you
out.
lose so much flavor that way. You're losing some of the flavor whenever you do that because you want to be sure that the flavors stay within the tissue, right? I
Right.
know I know so many people do that. They'll just I mean, we all love deer meat, of course, but give it a minute. If you can bring it off the fire, just give it a minute.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of good information for those that, don't know how to cook them and struggling with, how can we get, good food, from the animal we kill, no matter what it is,
Yeah,
even, rabbit, squirrel, um, pheasant, ducks, quails, deer, moose, whatever animal that is in season that you're hunting. And it's always nice to have good recipes. And it sounds like this guy's got some really good ones. So,
yeah, yeah. He does.
definitely have to order some of those books and see, especially maybe the buck moose and maybe the hook, line, and supper.
Yeah, if you're
Um,
a
you
fisherman,
know,
that'd be a great one. Yeah,
yeah, do fish a little bit. I don't do too much duck hunting anymore. I used to, but not too much anymore. But um, yeah, I think those two books would be some really nice ones to have in the recipe book to get some information,
yeah.
how to cook them.
Well, that's what we do. Why we do what we do, right? That's why we bow hunt. We're trying to trying to get some food for us, right? And that's important.
Yeah, no growth hormones or antibiotics or anything like that in it. It's all just pure natural stuff. And
That's right. And you just won't find a better. There's just no better source of protein on the planet. And there's just the thing about hunting, and I think that most of us would agree, we could go buy meat from the grocery store. If we're truly consumers of what we hunt, then there's no better way to do it, and it's an honest way to do it because you handled everything. You cut out the middleman at the supermarket. There's no, you did the killing, you did the butchering, and you're gonna eat this animal. And I think a lot of folks who don't hunt sometimes miss the fact that something had to die to go on that plate. And I love the fact that there's this new movement like field to table or farm to table because people
right,
are understanding where it comes from. And we as hunters, we owe it to the animal to do it right. And there's no reason to not eat good if you're gonna have a freezer full of venison. Then turn it into something fun, something good to eat.
Yeah, that's definitely what you want to do. And um, it's just there for a while. It's like I hadn't had beef in a long time, and first time I had some beef, it's like, ooh, what's wrong with this? Tastes weird.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, it's beef. Okay,
Beef,
it's
yeah.
just that complete different weird taste.
Yeah. My kids were like that when they were little. My daughter would not eat. We would go out to a restaurant and I'd have to lie to her, fib to her and say, "Hey, this is elk." And she would eat it, but she would like, you could tell she knew the difference because
Yeah.
when they were growing up, we rarely bought any meat. It was mainly stuff that I'd hunted, and yeah, my daughter, I think we were someplace, and she looked at me one time and said, "Dad, this is not elk. This is beef." Like, oh, is it? She finally called me on my bluff that I had there, but
She caught on.
yeah, she caught on after a while. That's for sure.
He actually go home and it's like have some real elk or something, and then go back. It's like, no, this isn't the same meat.
Yeah. She went to college and she came back home from college and I think it was either her first or second time back and I had cooked this big spread and because she'd been gone to college and she came in and just we ate like kings that night and she says, Dad, this what they're serving me at college is just not like this. And I'm like, well, don't get used to it. You got to go to college. You can't be staying here the whole time. When you get done with college, and you can come back and eat all you want. But it makes them appreciate it. I think it really when you do that when you have a kid when your kids eat venison and your kids know where they even though I'd say neither child is as obsessed with hunting like I was and I am, they still have an appreciation for it, and I think that's an important thing.
They're later on they might come back and say, you know
Yeah,
what, I want to start hunting. And I've talked to a lot of guys that they hunted and then had a family, and then now the family's grown up a little bit more and they're back hunting and with their kids now.
yeah, that's
And
great.
they just had to take some time off, and we all have to take some time off
Yeah, I
sometimes,
I
and
had to. I
for
mean,
one reason or
graduate
another.
school. Yeah, I mean, I can remember, graduate school, going from 3 or 4 deer a year to during grad school, just saying, if I get to go out once or twice, I'm going to get lucky. And there are things that happen that you just have to do. You take care of your family, and hunting is a privilege when you think about it. We're very fortunate in this country. I've got friends in Europe and they really look at our situation here and are envious because we get to hunt. And a lot of those European countries they don't get to bow hunt anyway. And so it's a privilege. And when you get, but job number one is take care of your family. And there gets to, it gets to a point where I notice now that my children are older, I've got a lot more free time to hunt. And I get to experience more now, almost like, I was before we had children. So it's great to see. It's great to see people come back to it when they've been away.
Yeah, it's something when you do it when you're young and you appreciate it. And I know my oldest, he still goes out and hunts a lot, and my youngest, he doesn't do too much anymore. But they all started out, shooting bows
Yeah.
when they were just little. Um, in fact, my oldest is, I don't remember how old he was, but he wasn't even a teenager yet, and he already had a Robin Hood. So
Yeah. Archery is something that you can do for your whole life. I've got friends that are in their 80s that are still shooting a bow and they still love it. And um, it's one of those skill sets that it's addictive. Number one, shooting a bow is addictive. I love it. I shoot every single day. Um, Whether I'm training for a hunt or training for a competition, I'm gonna get my arrows in. But you know, it's something you can do as long as you're healthy enough to draw the bow. It's something you can do for as long as you're on this earth, I think.
Yeah, and then when you get where you can't draw a compound or a recurve, there's crossbows.
Right, right.
You
Yeah,
know,
and I think that being able, there's something therapeutic about it. There's for me, there's a connection to when I'm shooting. I seem to be able to, whatever kind of day I've had, I can kind of let the world go away for a bit when I'm getting my arrows in. Or many times I'll start the day before work, going out, and I'll have a specific number of arrows I'm going to shoot. So if I'm training for something, I'm going to shoot X amount of arrows, and I'm going to execute, let's say, 30 good shots versus 100 crappy shots. So
right?
I always have a plan when I'm going to practice, but it's still a very relaxing time to go out and shoot your bow. Fred Bear said, the easiest way to ease a troubled mind is to shoot your bow. Just get your arrows and get your bow and go afield, and things get better. Whatever kind of day you had got better.
I know when I first had my shop, I was, working all the time. And, when you're not actually at work, you're thinking about, work and I was trying to get some huntings in, and I'm in the tree stand. And, it took quite a few times out before I could finally just sit there and hunt.
And
You're
relax.
constantly thinking about, okay, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. And then, you're thinking about that and you're not even enjoying being outside. And then,
Yeah,
after three or four times getting out, it's like, okay, now I can finally relax.
relax.
And
Yes, I find it it's sometimes difficult. I like to have long stretch. I like to have, like, when I take a vacation, for instance, to hunt. It takes a day or two for the outside world to kind of go away. If
yeah,
I'm doing an elk hunt, for instance, if I'm going to go, like the last one I did was Idaho, do it yourself in Idaho, and had a blast doing it. But it took a day or two before I feel like I am a hunter, like I'm in the woods again, because there's so many outside distractions that resonate. Like you said, you're thinking about business, or you're thinking about this or that, and I find that after a day or two, really about 2 days, is when I start to settle into the rhythm of the hunt, and I can start to just allow the kind of primal side of things to take over, where I'm actually a hunter again. And it's tough because we're bombarded constantly with media. We're on social media, we're on our phones, most of us work with computers. You're on a computer. There's just this constant information upload. And I think it takes a little while for your brain just to get into that zen like state where it's like, okay, I'm back to doing something that humans have been doing for thousands of years. And there's your body and soul recognizes that, in my opinion.
yeah, it's archer's been around for thousands of years. And in fact, I found evidence being 64,000 years old.
Yeah. Wow.
So, um, yeah, it's a sport that's been around for a long time. It's going to stay around. Now, in the last 10 years, it's really changed the technology and compound bows. Um, it's been that many years, and they didn't even have the first compound bow until late 60s. And then you weren't
Hmm.
really commercially available until the mid 70s, before like the Bear Whitetail
Yep.
2 come out, mid 70s. And, and then what they've changed from there in the last 50 years to
Yeah.
what they have now.
Yeah.
um yeah, it's changed a lot. And just in the last 20 years,
Yeah.
from the technology from the old 2001 2002 bows where they're real tall axle to axle, and now that they're parallel and beyond parallel limbs, and the no vibration, they don't jump in your hand like the old bows did, and they just kind of
Right.
sit still. And
Yeah.
I think,
For me, so I'm a traditional bow hunter, and I hunt with a longbow and hunt with wood arrows. And I'm probably, as far as timeline goes, I still have a laminated bow. It's still a wood bow, but you're shooting wood arrows. Then you think back to 10,000 years ago on this continent. If I'm not mistaken, that's when we see evidence that archery was part of their lives anyway. My bow is pretty close to that, but it's still technology wise light years ahead because I'm not shooting a dogwood shoot and a stone point and
Right.
a self bow. Even though I've done all those things, it was really cool to do. Um, you know, no matter what you're doing archery wise, I think it's still very much embedded into your DNA. We as hunters, and so many folks that don't. I feel sorry for the folks who don't think of hunting in a good light or never want to try it because I really do think that it taps into something. When I draw my longbow on a on an elk and I send an arrow through an elk, and I think about, how many thousands of years people have been doing that. And I'm a part of it, and it's a really cool concept to realize that you're taking an animal the way that the people that came across the Bering Strait on this continent were taking animals. It's a neat thing.
Yeah, it is. It's really cool you get back to that. I know even in the 60s when I started, the bows were either fiberglass or wood,
Yeah.
and your arrows were wood, aluminum, or fiberglass.
Yeah.
That's pretty much about what you had, and mostly wood.
Right.
Um, my first arrows were wood with feathers,
Yep.
and a fiberglass bow. It was a 25-pound Ben Pearson. I still have it. I still have some of my original arrows.
That's cool.
Um, and then for a long time, and then now I still have that bow, but I also have a PSE recurve, and
Hmm.
then I've got a couple other PSE compounds and a bear compound that I got, I don't know, probably 2016 or something like that.
Hmm.
When I worked at Cabela's, we would get in all the used bows,
Oh,
return
okay.
bows, and then we'd take a big, one of them little 4-foot cubes and all stuff full of all the returns, and we'd get them in and we'd pull them out and we'd fix them up and put them on our used rack, and we'd buy some, we could buy them right off the rack. So it was like a $900 bow, and I remember what I paid for it, 150, $200, something like that, because it needed a bunch of work, like strings, and
Right.
there was a screw stripped out, and I fixed all that. I used to make strings when I had my store, so um, that was no big deal.
That's cool. I uh, I think about the first bow that I got. I was 16, and this was 86, so compounds had been around for quite a long time, but I didn't have any money, and I think I had like $65, and I went to a pawn shop as a young kid. I don't even think I was driving yet, maybe I had a license, but I didn't have my mom's car. But I went into this pawn shop, and they had a recurve in there with a quickie quiver, which is the old quickie quiver that's stuck on the bow, but it didn't have a hood that covered up the broadheads. But they had a bunch of I think there were 6 or 7 arrows that came with the bow, and it was a Damon Howitt Hunter, I think is the name of it. I believe that was right. But anyway, I paid like $45 for this bow, and went into the backyard and started shooting it, and got good enough to where I felt like I was proficient enough to shoot a deer, and shot killed my first deer with a bow and with a recurve. And I hunted with compounds after that, like once I got into college and kind of moved on. But I really wish I still had that old recurve that I had when I was 16, because there would be some nostalgia to it. But
Right.
now I'm back to hunting with the same stuff I started out with, because I wanted more of a challenge. I wanted to hunt with a traditional bow because you have to be closer to the animals. I killed a bunch of stuff with a compound, and I gravitated more towards the traditional side. And I have no problems with people shooting whatever they want to shoot. it's more of a personal journey for myself to be back where I started hunting with a traditional bow, and I love it. And but I would have no problem hunting with a compound. If I can't draw a recurve or a longbow anymore, then I'd have no problem going and doing something different. But it's it's just a lot of history to it, and just enjoyment, personal satisfaction from it.
Yeah, and that's the key to, shooting archery is, what do you want to shoot? What do you want out of it? And, that's, what I always ask that new archers that come in, they're thinking about taking an arch, and it's like, well, what do you plan on doing? Why did you decide that you wanted to try out archery?
Yes,
Back when the Hunger Games, well, they seen the Hunger Games and wanted,
right.
liked what Cat was doing. Well, okay, so you want a recurve, do you want to just fling arrows in your backyard? Do you want to compete with it, or you want to hunt with it? All those things you want to do is like, hey, if you just want to fling arrows in your backyard, perfect.
Yeah,
If you want to go beyond that, hey, come on in. We'll get you set up for the next, next level that you want to go with. And um, and that's why, when I have my store, every bow come with shooting instructions. I always taught you how to shoot. Because the last thing I
that's
wanted was
great.
to buy a bow and, especially with the recurve, start smacking your arm, or even a compound smacking the arm. So I had to be set up right for you, and, the proper grip, and, all that. And, that's why I always taught them, because I wanted them to stay in the sport. And I never tried to
Yeah,
push the
for
high
sure.
end stuff. I always push, beginners need beginner bows.
Yeah, and starting out, marketing employees are great. I mean, the big bow companies do a great job of showing their latest and greatest. But I always tell people to start out with the best equipment you can afford. But I would rather them spend $300 on a bow and then $150 on some archery lessons than to spend $800 on a setup and get no instruction. I mean,
Right.
you can just there's a learning curve with any new thing you try. But with archery, you can get some pretty dang good equipment for half of what maybe the high end stuff is, and you could take that money, and if you were going to spend, say, another 150, $200, you can get archery coaching.
Right.
There's a gentleman named Tom Klum in Colorado, and he has an archery shop there, and Rocky Mountain Specialty Gear, and he's one of the best teachers of traditional archery because he's been through the Olympic coaching cycle. He's a level 4 coach, level 5 coach. I can't remember which, but uh, you know that's a good thing to do. Is, I mean, if you got somebody in a shop like yours that can teach them, sell a bow and say, okay, we're gonna work on the dynamics, or we're gonna work on the form of how to shoot the bow. That's important because
Right.
it. I mean, YouTube's a great thing. There's so many things you can learn from YouTube that we didn't have back in our day. We had to do it the old-fashioned way. You had to figure it out, and you had to find some old guy who knew something about archery that might tell you, give you some tips. But there's a lot of good information out there, and buying, the latest and greatest doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make you successful. What makes you successful is learning how to shoot the bow and getting those reps in and building that confidence up.
Right. And when I first started, uh, if you wanted it recorded, you did it on a VCR. Phones didn't record video.
Yeah,
Yeah, phones were making phone calls. That was it. You didn't
right,
have text. You had phone calls, and then you had VCR, and
right.
we're watching on VCR, and trying to see if there. But most of my coaching was, I'm going to watch you shoot. I'm going to try and pick up what you're doing and make
Yeah,
corrections. Shoot again, and then pick up something else. And now, with the phones, I've done some coaching online. And I've got some students that I've done that with, and uh, you know that's the thing, about the Arch Talk 101 Facebook group. Take a video of you shooting, upload it. We're
yeah,
going to help you out for free. Now, if you want constant thing, then, I'm going to charge you for, you know, lessons. But
Right.
if you want me to review one and give you some pointers on a video, upload it.
Yeah.
I've done that. Um, I had two guys. The first guy I taught online was in Italy, and the second guy I taught was in Canada.
Wow. Yeah. That's
And
cool.
and the the guy in Canada, he had like his grouping was maybe 4 or 5 inch groups. I spent 45 minutes on a Zoom call with him, kind of like we're doing here.
Yeah.
And a couple weeks later, he sent me a picture, 3 arrows touching.
There you go. That's
You
great.
know, so and that's just a one-time deal. And I know when I had my store, I was charging $100 an hour for shooting instruction. Now,
Yeah.
and we never spend an hour with you because we go and teach you, go practice, and come back. And
Right.
but for 150, 200, dollars, you can get some pretty good instruction just one-time stuff.
Yeah, right. And that's sometimes that's what it takes, right? You can build so many bad habits. I was a right-handed archer up until 2.5 years ago, and I had an injury to my shoulder. I'm a martial artist, so I hurt my shoulder training, and so I switched to left-handed, and whenever I switched to left-handed, I knew I had built up some bad habits right-handed. Even though I'd won a bunch of tournaments and I'd killed a bunch of critters, I knew I had bad habits right-handed. So when I switched to left-handed, it was almost like I got a second lease on life, and
Right,
I built a shot sequence and process and form as good as I could build it. And it took me getting some instruction myself, even though I'd been bow hunting for 34 years. It never hurts to have someone else look at your form and then accept honest feedback,
right,
of or a lot of times I'll have a problem. Let's say I shoot left-handed. So let's say I'm shooting right and I can't figure out why my arrows are grouping right. Well, I'll video myself and send it to my one of my good friends who are instructors, and I'll say, okay, here's my setup, here's my release, here's what my finish looks like. And they can pick up on it a lot quicker than
oh
me.
yeah,
They can watch me shoot 2 or 3 times and go, this is what you're doing. And it's different the way you normally shoot. So instruction is, getting back to that theme. I mean, having good equipment's great, but man, you could spend 150, $200 on some archery instruction and you will jump light years ahead of where you're at
right,
because it's so difficult to self critique. When I was learning how to shoot left-handed, I videoed myself hundreds of shots, and then I would see something in my form. Maybe I didn't have the anchor where I wanted it. My elbow was too high, or you go through. But I just constantly critiqued myself to where I felt like my form was pretty good, and then made sure that other people saw me shoot and gave me pointers. So yeah, instructions, if we're taking this thing serious to where we're going to go out and hunt, especially, and we're going to, be, putting an arrow in an animal to provide food for the family, being as proficient with a weapon as you can be should be at the top of the list of everything.
yeah. I know I had a lady join the Arch Talk 101 Facebook group, and she posted thing, what am I doing wrong? Because her group was all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, take a video and upload it. Well, when I was watching her shoot, one time she would move her hand away, sometimes go
Mm-hmm.
up, sometimes go back.
Mm-hmm.
Eh, The only ones that grouped together when she did exact the same release or close to the same release. So I says,
Mm-hmm.
here's what you're doing here, and this shot, this shot, this shot. You're all consistent. You do something the same, and that she never took another video and uploaded how she was doing. But hey, that's the something we can look at. And fortunately now I have a video editor that I can download the video and upload it to the editor, and I can go frame, just by an arrow key, I can go frame at a time through the video, and I can see exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
That's nice. What I didn't have that when I had VCRs or live
Right.
because I have to catch it.
Right.
And I've had, I've told us before this. I had this guy come in, and he had a PhD. He wasn't a medical doctor, but he had a PhD, and he didn't want to buy a low end bow. He wanted a high end bow. So I did it, and I taught him how to shoot. You know, because you want to do that, I won't refuse to sell it to you. I just
Sure,
don't
absolutely.
start off beginners with those,
Right.
because I think it's too much money to start off with. And about 2 weeks later, he comes in, it's like, oh man, I just destroyed $20, or $10 or what it was. He Robin Hood two of his arrows. Like, cool.
Yeah, that's
So he's gonna
great.
hang it up in his office.
That's cool. Well, I think when you get somebody that starts out in the sport and they have success, whether it's in target archery or hunting, it sets the hook. That's the way I look at it. Is you get your bow, you practice, you have some success. Now the hook's set. Now you're a lifer. You're not going anywhere. You're part of the tribe now, right?
Yeah. And there's always people that'll help you out, and that's the key is getting some good instruction. And those that buy a compound bow, I always tell them, buy what fits you, spend only what you have to get the setup. The ready to shoot packages are really great.
Yep.
They don't normally come with, a lot of times it'll be a biscuit, which is probably not the best one unless you're bouncing through brush or something.
Right.
And then not a very good sight. They'll have a quiver, and buy the low end arrows. Don't buy the high end ones because you can't shoot good enough to see a
Tell the
difference.
difference. Right.
But don't buy a cheap release. Buy a good quality release because that is your main thing is your release of that string.
Yep.
Um, Now with traditionals like you don't have a mechanical release, but you'll have a tab or a glove.
Hmm.
I believe the tabs are probably the smoothest. I
Yeah, I
always use
agree.
the glove because I didn't really like my fingers tied up on a tab.
Hmm.
Uh, but then on my fishing bow, my recurve that I got to start fishing, I don't use a glove or tab. I got the no gloves on it
Right.
because I'm
Those
not going
work
to
great.
be on the water and get slimy on my glove and try and grab the string. I just use one of those, and that's nice on that.
Yeah.
But you got to have that consistent release. And like I said, that one lady, she'd come back to her anchor point, which changed. And
Yep.
then sometimes she would just open her fingers. Sometimes she'd move her hand up, sometimes out, sometimes back. There was no two. I don't think she had more than two that was somewhat similar releases. And that's the key. And with the mechanical release, you got to do that properly. You can't pull the trigger. I
Right.
still be if you're using a wrist strap or even the thumb releases,
Hmm.
um, quit pulling the trigger. You do not pull the trigger, and you put it on your wrist, not your hand. I see so many of them slide that it's clip on their hand.
Yeah.
Well, that's not where it's supposed to be, and you'll see them their finger out, and then they'll just cram on that trigger. And
Yep.
I've
Yep.
seen some of the little shorts of the this one lady gonna she'll bend all over and she all this movement. It's like, dude, you need to get a hold of me because you're doing this the hard way. Using your shoulders and your arms to pull it instead of your back, and then
Right.
the fingers locked out as stiff as she can make it, and then crams on the
Boom.
trigger, and it's like,
Yep.
yeah, okay. Then I seen a guy with a recurve. He was doing it, and he was plucking his hand way out. He'd shoot and plug it way out, and it's like, yeah, okay, you're somewhat consistent, but not even consistent at what he was doing. So
Yes. Well, it's like so Einstein's definition of madness is doing the same thing over and expecting a different result. With archery, it's doing the same thing over and wanting the same result, right? So you gotta you gotta do the whatever you're when we talk about good form, it's consistency, and like for instance your release, making sure that you're pulling through with your back, and as the shot breaks you're finishing in the same spot every time, because that what you do on the back end affects the front end. So whatever you do
right.
back here is going to affect how the arrow travels down range. But you see people shoot with. I've seen people shoot really good with bad form, but it's the
Yeah,
same bad form over and over. So they're repeating the same thing, even though it's technically not proper teed up and proper release. But they do the same thing over again. it's like a really good golfer, a guy named Jim Furyk, whose golf swing looked like, I mean, it did not look like a great golf swing, but he did the same thing over and over, and it made it work for him. This you just have to be consistent, whatever it is in your form. Ideally we all shoot with nice clean form, but um, just getting it to work for you. And we all have different bodies. We're all built different, and then having somebody like yourself who can kind of help teach the archer to paint by numbers. Have a
Right.
checklist of things to do. These are the things you're doing in your form, and you need to be consistent when you do that.
Well, and the grip is such an important part of it. When I do mine, I open my hand up and then gets it in that webbing part of my hand between the thumb and the index finger, and then I relax my hand and let it drop down. And
Yeah.
then when I'm teaching, I always ask, you had any martial arts experience? And I'd say yes. Okay, heel palm strike. That's the part that you're pushing on the bow. And you know what that is because you said you had martial arts.
Yeah.
What art did
Yep.
you take?
Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I
Oh,
still,
okay.
yep, still train. I'm still training. I've been in it for about 11 years now.
I did Hapkido for about 20 years.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
I'd like to do it again, but I don't think um, with the surgeries and stuff I've had, I don't think my body would like taking the falls.
Yeah, that's the downside to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and Hapkido. I mean, for me, I love to train, but also at 55 years old, several knee surgeries, several other surgeries, I have to I have to train I have to be smart. So I have to train smart. I can't roll around the mats with a bunch of young killers anymore. I'm pretty well, I'm good for a couple of rolls, and then if I don't really know you, and I'm probably not going to roll with you because I got to go to work tomorrow. I can't be banged up. I'm not in my
Yeah.
20s anymore.
Well, and
Um,
and last year I had a triple bypass, and then in April, and then in June they went back in and put plates in, and then here at the beginning of this last month, I got hit really hard from behind, so that kind of set me back. So
oh
I'm still trying
man.
to recover from that. So I haven't even been able to draw my bow back, for well over a year,
Oh
and
man.
I've got a 25-pound left-handed one that I was thinking about making a string, but I'm not sure if I can even draw that back yet. So, I can't go out and do that. At least I can go back out to the skating rink. So, but I'm set way back on that. So now I'm starting over on that. And
Well, one
so,
percent better, man. Just get 1% better
yeah,
every day. You'll be drawing a bow in no time.
yeah. Well, and I'm 70 this year. So, um, yeah, I'm not taking any falls anymore like that.
Roger that. I got that.
I, when I get a little better, I wouldn't mind throwing them again and doing
Yeah,
the joint
but
locks
not
and
landing,
stuff.
right?
But I
Not
don't want to
landing.
do the falls anymore.
Right. It's the sudden stop that gets you anyway, right?
Yeah, yeah. Even though we are breaking our fall, so it's pretty soft, and if you have a mat, that helps out a little bit. But you're still um, pretty good jarring, and right now I'm still having enough trouble just laying on my chest when I
Yeah.
when I go to the chiropractor and they lay on a chest, like, okay, that hurts. So, but anyway, yeah, that's some we've had some variety of conversations today.
Hey, anytime we're talking about, we can slip in hunting, shooting archery, cooking great food, and martial arts all in one conversation. It was a pretty good conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I did Hapkido for about 20 years.
That's great.
And yeah, it's pretty good. I started out pretty young, and I quit testing when I bought my store in 2001 because I was so busy at the store, and I'd made it to third Dan then, and I wanted to test for fourth, but I couldn't afford it, and I didn't have the time. It wasn't working out. I was like, okay, I'm not going.
Yeah,
And now I'm not going to go back and try and go beyond third, but hey,
that's
there's
still
still
that's still a
stuff
heck.
that
That's a heck of an accomplishment, though, man. That's
yeah.
great.
Yeah, well, it takes about 20 years just to get there. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
and
amazing.
I don't know how quick they advance you once you get the black belt in jujitsu, but Hapkido, it's way slower than Taekwondo.
Oh
Judo is
yeah.
slow as well.
Yeah, so I did judo as well. It takes 10 years of consistent training to get a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And, you know, unfortunately, I've had some injuries here and there. I'm a purple belt, so I'm due for brown belt probably. If I keep training within a couple years, it's a long process. It's a very long process, but you know this from martial arts. It's kind of like archery. It is archery is a martial art, right? But
Right,
you do that not for belt. For me personally, I'm not looking to see how many belts I can get. It's good for your mind, good for your body, great for self defense. Those are the reasons you train, any martial art. And whatever belt rank you end up, that's awesome. But I think if we're doing it for the right reasons, and if you did it for 20 years, it's you you love what you do, and there is a mental, it does help you mentally.
right,
It helps you to learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable, which
right.
a lot of martial arts is you're very uncomfortable. And
Yeah,
I think it's helped me. I told my black belt that I trained with um, on one of my hunts. I was not in physical shape to climb a mountain, but I did it anyway, and it was just tough mentally. But if it hadn't been for jujitsu, I don't know if I would have done, finished the hunt the way I finished it. But it was, it helps with mental fortitude. Because
right.
I call it the law of comparable suffering. What you're doing at the time really does, it may suck really bad, but does it suck as bad as this other thing that you've done that was really, really hard? And
Yeah,
the law of comparable suffering applies. And if it's a new level of suffering, then great, you've found a new benchmark. But you can always say, this really sucks, but I don't know if it is as bad as a 270-pound guy crushing you, trying to strangle you. No, it's probably not that bad. So maybe I could just keep going.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Definitely. There's a lot of stuff because I did martial arts for so long, and in '95 is when I learned. I went for some instruction, learned the back tension release, and till then I was like, how do you know when the bow's going to go off? Well, you don't want to, but so I combined the two.
Yeah.
Into how I teach. And then, I'm going to teach one form and then modify it because everybody's body's different. But I'm
Right.
going to teach basically this way. And if it doesn't work, then we'll look at something else. And one of the things I teach is I teach a completely closed stance. Um, but because of the grip I teach, which is what all your top archers use, I don't even hit my arm with my recurve
Mm.
because of the grip I'm using, and I have a slight bend in my arm, so I don't hit it at all. And I do the same thing, at the compound and recurve, I use the same grip. The only difference is on a compound, I don't hang onto the bow at all. In recurve, I have to kind of wrap my fingers around lightly so it'll hit my hands when it
Right.
goes off.
Right.
But I still don't have a death grip on them because
No.
yeah, with death grip on a compound bow, when you let down, you normally derail the string
Yeah.
because
Well,
you torque it sideways.
with a traditional bow, if you've got a death grip on the bow, you're going to be that bow is going to move left or right in your hand instead of forward and back the way it should move.
Right,
Yeah, I use a finger sling, so it goes around my index finger, my thumb,
right.
and I'm able to shoot the bow and without much hand on the grip. And I shoot a bow, my longbow, just like you shoot your compound. I tell people to stick their hand out, wave, roll their fingers down, and use that part of your thumb is where you're going to be pushing into the bow. So very, very similar grip than what you use. But I try to relax my hand enough to where that finger sling, if I didn't have it on, the bow would jump out of my hand. That's how I want my hand relaxed enough to where um, because tension in your hands is, and you know this, tension in your hands, it isn't ipsilateral. If you have tension in your bow arm, you're going to have tension in your string hand too. And you want
Yeah.
tension in your back, not in your hands or your forearms. And trying to get people to relax their hands, but still, like with a traditional bow, still keep their hook around the string. But you can have a hook around the string and a relaxed hand.
Right.
It seems like you can't, but you can. Um, and having that finger sling for me is really nice because I can shoot with a really relaxed hand. And most compounds have a wrist, have that wrist sling, right?
Right.
Yeah. So if even the bow jumps, it's just not going anywhere.
Well, and the reason I use a sling is because when you're out hunting, it's much easier to put your hand in and not have to worry about hooking that thing because now your
Yep.
hand is always on the bow. Because
Yeah.
like you don't have time normally when the deer comes in. Sometimes you're lucky to be able to get the bow up to draw, let alone
Yeah.
try and put a sling or something on there.
Yeah. I
But
use the same thing. I use a piece of 550 cord on my longbow, using it the same way as a wrist sling. So when I'm hunting, I still have that wrist sling approach. But you're right, trying to put a finger sling on and grab your bow with a deer coming is probably not going to work out for you a lot of times.
yeah, yeah, because you try to get them so close anyway, and if they're coming in, then you got time. But
Yeah.
last times I've seen it's like, where'd you come from?
Yeah.
And they're like, I'm looking at them through my stand, and it's like, where'd you
Yeah.
come from?
It's like they just appear out of thin air. I know I've had a couple times with bears. Bears are, you think a bear being that big would not be quiet, but I can't tell you how many times I've just looked up and there's a bear. And it's like didn't make a sound.
Yeah.
They're like ghosts. They just like vaporize, just pop in and out.
Walking in quiet reminds me when I was at the chiropractor the other day. Um, she's in there, she turns around, she's doing something on the computer, something facing away from me. And I walk up, she don't turn around, and I say something. She jumped, it scared her. It's like I normally hear people walking up. Well, you don't hear bow hunters walking up because they're used to
No,
walking without making any sound. And
exactly. That's what my wife says all the time. She's like, she'll be in the kitchen or whatever, and then I'll just walk in the kitchen, but I'm not very noisy. And she'll turn around and it'll startle her. She goes, "Where'd you come from?" I'm like, "I just walked in the room." She's like, "Old habits die hard. You just
yeah, yeah.
you learn how to walk quietly."
Well, and then too in martial arts, we don't pick our feet up when we walk
Yep.
because buddy used to hunt with all the time. He was judo for decades. He was doing judo, and you don't pick up your feet at all in there. As soon as you pick up your foot, you're on the ground.
Yeah, that foot
And
sweep you. You're going to get flipped on your head. Yeah.
and he'd fall in the forest all the time. He's walking, and boom, down he'd go. And like, well, because he trips over the least little branch because he's not used to picking his feet up. Now in Hapkido, we pick him up a little bit more, but not much. We don't pick him up and stomp him down like
Right.
you hear in a lot of people. It's like, man, you sound like an elephant walking, and he's just a little person. It's like, how do you walk that loud with your feet? Because it hurt my knees.
Yeah, they just stomp. Yeah, they just stomp
Yeah,
through the woods. I pride myself. I really enjoy stalking mule deer, especially Western game, and I pride myself on being able to move slow and quiet. And that's a skill. If you're a young hunter, I think about squirrel hunting as a kid. You learn how to. I'm a big believer that you learn how to slip through the woods quietly when you're hunting squirrels with a 22. You have to get close, you have to be quiet, and you have to stalk up on a squirrel. I really think I learned how to do that learning how to squirrel hunt, just learning how to move quietly through the woods.
yeah. Now, if you want to walk up on a squirrel and not have to worry about anything, be in full camo.
Yeah.
They do not see you. They cannot figure out what you are. Um, I had one running on a branch underneath me, and I pulled out my wallet. Oh, squirrel season's open. So I put it back in my pocket. I drew on the squirrel. He was looking at me the whole time. And It didn't even move until the arrow went through him.
Yeah, that's that. Squirrel hunting with a bow that's a lot of fun. I mean, I have squirrel arrows that I make up, and I usually will wait until later in the year to do it. But I like to do it when all the leaves are off the trees, of course. But man, that is a lot of fun trying to slip up on squirrels. When they're out on the ground or they're looking for nuts in the winter, or even when they're in the trees. But I'll make flu arrows, um, not the full six fletched flu, but I'll make a four fletched flu, something that still has some. You can shoot pretty. It's still pretty fast, but you're not going to stick it into the tree every time you shoot it. But that's a lot of fun. Hunting anything with a bow is a lot of fun. What are we talking about?
Yeah, yeah. No matter what you're hunting.
That's right.
I had a neighbor say one time he went out pheasant hunting with his bow.
Yeah, I've seen people
Uh,
do that. I've tried it. I have to be honest. We have we don't have pheasant in this part of Illinois, but we have these put and take kind of farms where they have pheasants and you can hunt them. And
oh yeah.
I did take my bow out there and try to. I did shoot. Let's see. I shot a chucker. I didn't shoot a pheasant, but yeah, those are. I did shoot. Man, grouse hunting. Have you ever hunted grouse before?
Yeah, with shotgun when I was actually up in Canada.
Okay. I went on a hunt in again in British Columbia, and they had grouse are everywhere, and I made special arrows just for grouse, and I had as much fun stalking and shooting grouse as I did hunting moose. I think it was a blast. It was an absolute blast.
Yeah, I was always going in a drive down to where we would stay, and we were on Ear Falls, Ontario is where we was at. And down the drive there's two grouse alongside the road. And they don't care about you. I don't think you
No.
ever get hunted much. And I get out and got shotgun loaded shotgun up, and Moy says, "Well, shoot both of them." So I move around, line up, and I shoot both of them with one shot because they weren't moving or nothing. So I was like, okay, well, here's dinner tonight, that's for sure.
Hey, that is in grouse is it's really good to eat. I've
Oh yeah, it
really
is.
we were I went to the grocery store and got shake and bake um, stuff to make chicken with, and we were in a bush camp, so it wasn't like we had a lot of things to cook with. And I made shake and bake grouse one night, and it was phenomenal. It was phenomenal.
It's always extra good sometimes at a campfire. There's something about cooking on that open fire that
Oh yeah.
makes it extra good.
Heck yeah. Yeah. Anytime you're around a campfire and you've got hunting stories and you've got, good friends, and some good game meat, it's pretty hard to beat. And there's a reason why we've been doing that for thousands of years. There's something
Yeah.
primal about that too. You're sitting around a campfire with your buddies and you're eating wild game and telling hunting stories. That's something they were doing 10,000 years ago on this planet. Look at all the cave art. They
Yeah.
were basically telling stories.
Yeah, they're drawing what they're seeing, and
Yeah,
sometimes there's some weird looking shapes they're drawing, but uh,
yeah. Well, they weren't all Picassos.
no, no, kind of stick figures, and yeah, it's yeah, yeah, like you said, we're talking about all kinds of things now. So, um, like I said before we got started, hey, where we go, we go.
That's great. That's great,
Yeah.
Roy.
I don't have an agenda for the podcast. Those that would like to be a guest on here, hey, just get a hold of me. I'd be glad to have you. Whether you're just thinking about archery or starting out, or you're a pro or a seasoned archer, we all have stories, and that's why I call it Arch Talk 101, because hey, you were here to help archers out. And I always say the only dumb question is the one you haven't asked yet, because once you ask it, it's not dumb because that was your question. Yeah. Now, if you ask it 20 times, now then we may not answer you anymore. But
Right.
ask those questions, and join the group. And there's always people out there that are willing to help, and always all kinds of good stories. And Sometimes we get into hunting stories. Sometimes, like this one, we didn't really tell much about hunting stories, a little bit, but hey, something we need to learn how to do is cook the meat that we have. And yeah, you got some good information. Like I said, I'll leave some links for that book in here, the whole website, and get some, because that's the key that I didn't know when I says, how do I fix it?
Right.
I didn't know how to fix the meat, so we never had much of it because just didn't know the best way to fix it. And if I did something like that, man, that would have been complete game changer in how to fix all these
Absolutely.
different things. And yeah, I'm gonna have to get some of that because I've got some deer. Um, Even though I can't go out and hunt, I got one with my car this last year.
Oh no.
Yeah, I'm going down the highway at 60 miles an hour, and there's cars coming the other way. So, of course, I can't see very well. And the deer appeared in full run, stretched out in front of my car.
Oh,
I was doing 60 miles an hour. It missed the bumper completely because it never sent the airbag off. And
wow.
and it hit, normally when you hit one at that fast, it's going to be alongside the road or just off the road. No, this deer was running fast enough. It ended up about 30 feet off the road.
Gosh.
And when I was able to watch the dash cam, it was standing alongside of there. I could see it just before it started running, just for a couple seconds. I have to go, frame advance to see how much, but it just, all of a sudden, it took off. And you know how they can go from 0 to full speed
Oh
in
yeah.
about 2 steps. Well, that's what it did. And when the first time I seen it, it was already past half of my car.
Mm, dang.
And yeah, and it sliced up the neck and broke the front shoulder and leg, and of course I pulled over, and I'm sitting there, of course I called the cops. And here in Nebraska, if you hit a deer, they issue a roadkill permit. So
Mm.
that was my deer, but it cost me a car.
I don't know how good of a trade that was, Roy.
No, no, it wasn't. We got another one same year and same model, and it was still like $1,500, and it was 2004 Toyota Corolla.
Oh
So
wow.
yeah, and it didn't have that many miles on it, but it was still, had a couple 100,000 miles on it, but it still run good. But now it's kind of crunched in, and able to use that parts to fix the new one we got.
There you go.
But so. Yeah, I've had some of that, and we that same day after we picked it, I called my son. He come down, we loaded it up, and of course hauled the car back, and we had everything all cut up and ready to go and vacuum sealed, except most of it. And then I had a couple pieces to finish the next day, and within 24 hours, he was all cut up and in the freezer.
There you go. All
Yeah,
that good food, but man, you hate to waste a car on one.
yeah. Well, and I had my hunting backpack in there, so I had knives and stuff in there, and I'm
Oh,
thinking,
that's good.
because it wasn't dead. You could see its head moving, and I said, okay, I'm gonna go back there, get my hunting knife out, and you know finish it off so it's not sitting there in major pain.
Right.
And then I got and it started moving. It's like and it recovered. It basically stunned it, and then because I didn't act quick enough on that, it was waking up enough that it could, and it got up and tried to move. Of course, the front whole leg was all shattered. It was
Yeah.
never going to live because the neck was sliced open. It would
Right.
have been infected and it would have died anyway. So then the sheriff gets there, and he's moved a little bit more when the sheriff got there. And finally I says, I'm going to stand here and you go way around there. And then it moved again into the bushes, and I heard him shoot twice. And he says, I think I missed the first time, but he got it the second time. And yeah, he did. Right at the base of the neck, at the skull. He got it. And,
Didn't waste
and
any meat
it's
though.
no, no. That just killed it, just instantly killed it. And then we hauled it off. And I had another time going down the highway where we hunt, and this deer had been hit by a car and was off the side. It was still alive. It was trying to crawl and stuff. So of course we called the sheriff to come out and take care of it. And then of course what's he do? The first thing he does, he starts walking behind it. Now it's crawling across the road.
Uh,
And finally, then he gets over there on the other side and he shoots. So I said, okay, it's dead. I go in there and go to, start doing something with it, and it starts moving. And so then, of course, I had to slit its throat, and then it finally died. And I come to figure out later, because it was a little buck, one of his antlers was gone.
Oh
The cop
no.
shot the antler and stunned it.
You might need to go to marksmanship. Back to marksmanship.
Yeah, he's going to shoot it in the head, but he missed and hit the antler. It's like, I know, where is the other antler? It's broke off. It's like,
That's hilarious.
and I didn't have my gun with me or nothing, so I couldn't shoot it. And when I hit the deer, I can't. I didn't have my gun with me because after my heart surgery, I couldn't have pulled the trigger on it anyway because it hurt too much. They
Yeah,
just put me
sure.
back in the hospital to pull the trigger, so I
Right,
wasn't going to shoot it.
right.
And besides, on the side of the road, oh, it's out in country, so you know there was no houses anywhere that near enough to worry about it. But I wasn't going to discharge a firearm outside of there when I got a cop coming with a gun that can shoot it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's all.
but
They might frown upon that a little bit too.
he said I could have shot it if I'd had my gun with me. I could have shot it.
Yeah,
Because obviously it hit the car. The car is disabled. It won't run anymore.
right.
So it's obvious that I hit it with the car. So, uh, you know, I didn't, but, I was almost told my wife, well, you might want to bring a gun. But then the cop was coming and he has guns. So I didn't worry about it then.
Let
Now,
him take care
not
of it.
every place you can do that. If you hit one, sometimes some states, I think in Texas, it's not your deer. Here in Nebraska, if you hit one, um, then they give you roadkill permit, and it doesn't come across your regular hunting permits. It's
Yeah,
separate.
that's the way it is. That's the way it is in Illinois as well.
Well, it should be. Otherwise, the meat gets wasted.
Right. Yeah, there's no sense
And
in it. I've done that before too. I hit a young deer. We had a really bad EHD. I don't know if you're familiar with that illness, but the deer it got hit. They hit us. It hit us pretty hard here a few years back. Yeah, it's probably been 10 years back, but I had not taken a deer purposely that year because our deer herd had taken a big hit. But of course, I hit one with my car, my new truck, and same thing. It expired before the cop got there, and he issued me a roadkill permit. We had to get it. We have to get the permit, I think, um, from the game warden, but it was obvious there was a police report and all that stuff. So, but same
yeah,
thing. I think I had that thing butchered. The kids were little. I think I had that thing butchered and in the cooler in less than 24 hours.
yeah. Well, here in Nebraska, the cop actually issues the roadkill permit. You don't have to do anything in game and parks.
Oh, that's good.
But he did fill out a police report. The accident. And
Yeah,
originally when I called in, they said, "Well, you can just file online." It's like, no, I need the officer to come out and take a report and to issue me a roadkill permit.
yeah, and dispatch the animal too.
Right, right. Because I didn't
Right.
know because I hadn't gone and looked for him because I hit him and I pulled off the road. So and they asked me, is there deer on the road? I says no, and I was off the road too, so I wasn't impeding traffic or anything.
Right.
Um, which at 65-mile-an-hour speed limit, you don't want to be on the road
Right.
if you
No
can all
kidding.
help it.
No kidding.
But yeah, that was, I didn't get hurt. The car got killed, but
Yeah, that's funny.
yeah. So that's another story, and eventually I'll get the video of that up on my YouTube channel. But I have all kinds of stuff on my YouTube channel.
I have to check it out. I haven't been there in a bit.
Yeah, I just last night I hit 1,000 subscribers.
Oh, good deal.
So I just today I went through and finished all the paperwork so they can go out, and now then they go look at my channel, and then they approve or deny, being monetized. And I don't have anything controversial out there because I don't really do anything like that on my channel because I have stuff like, I might have a welding project working on, welding up panels on the car because I did a bunch of videos on repair and rust, and I did stuff on fixing trailers, working on cars. We've got a whole series on that, and I had a camper that the back all rotted out underneath there, and I did videos on that. Of course, then I have all my podcasts out there and other archery videos are out there. And, I'm working on a project and I'm doing that of gardening videos and, just kind of all over the place. I don't have a
That's
specific
great though,
channel.
man.
So I have lots of stuff out there and, sometimes, as I'm doing something, it's like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm figuring it out as I go. And I've had others say, well, you don't know what you're doing. Yeah, so.
I'm
And
trying to
then
figure it out.
on the same video, so it's like, oh man, I was having that same problem. I'm going to take it in and get it fixed. You know,
That's great. It's
it's like
called learn while you burn. Sometimes you're
right.
figuring it out as
And
you go. I
I'm
was
a
I was doing drywall earlier, and I was definitely learning as I went.
yeah, yeah. One kid, don't put too much mud on.
Yeah, that's a good
The
tip.
thinner, the better.
That's a good tip. That's exactly
Less
right.
the sand off.
That's
And
right.
I being an electrical engineer, working on cars is not my job. But
Right.
I've been working on cars since about the time I could drive. So I've been working on cars for almost 60 years. Um, my dad was real good at go change the oil. Go.
He
He
could.
actually had a correspondence course he had on auto mechanics, and he never took it. It was like me and my brother did it.
That's
But he
pretty
had the
neat.
stuff, so we learned it, and we've been working on our cars, all along, and he to fix something, and I always did a lot of stuff. It's like, well, here's a project I need done. I can hire somebody to do it, or I can buy the equipment for less money and figure out how to do it. Now I have the equipment next time I need to do it.
Yeah, there you go.
So I would use that. It's like I'd buy the equipment I needed for it and then work on it. Now then I have it next time I need a project like that, I have it again. So, you have a lot of that stuff. And then, you know, now I'm 70 and I pretty much don't need to really, if I don't have the tool, I'm not going to need it more than once. So I'll just find something else that works.
That's funny.
Like taking the hose clamps off, was working on one while I was trying to use regular pliers to open it up, and it's like, well, the slip joint ones would have worked probably a little better, but there's a tool designed just for those to do that, and
Right.
it works really good. But I'm not gonna go out and buy it for using it once or twice.
That's right. Yeah, I've got a whole lot of tools that I only use once or twice, and now they're just collecting dust. So,
Well, and I've got, having the archery shop, I've got a bow press, but it won't work on the new ones.
mm,
And in some of the newer ones, I got a portable bow press that just use a cable that pull in. Well,
right,
on those that are parallel, a little bit beyond parallel, I can't use it on those anyway. So I can do the parallel ones or the split limbs because I have a little adapter that can do on the split limbs.
right.
But I'm not going to go out and buy one of the easy presses that you can press all the new bows and stuff on because I'm working on my bows. I'm not really doing anybody else's anymore. And my newest ones, I think, are like well, I've got the 2015 Bear, but other than the ones I work on normally are, 2001 and 2003, and that year ones, which that old Apple press works just fine on. And
There you
I got
go.
string making jig and all this string to make. I could probably make a string every week and never run out of string material for the rest of my life.
That's I've got the same. I've got a string jig and I've got string, and I was trying to figure out the other day how many more strings would I could I make with what I got, and it came to an infinite number to where I don't need to buy any more string material because I'm 55. The likelihood of me needing another 100 strings is going to be pretty low.
Well, and you buy the big rolls of the string material, and then you buy the stuff to do all the rest of the string, and what you spent on there, um, back 20 some years ago, I made one string and I broke even on that one roll of string material.
Yeah, right.
And then by the time you make a second one, now you're in profit, and there's probably enough to make 20 or 30 strings on one of those rolls.
Yeah,
You, you
yep.
know, but I had all these different colors because when I made a string, I said, what color you want? And they'd say black. I'd say no. Unless your bow is all black, you're not getting a black string. Pick two different colors, your favorite colors.
Right.
But if
There's some
they
pretty
insisted, then I
extravagant
would. But
colors in bow strings. There's some pretty extravagant colors.
yeah. Yeah, there is. And I did the same thing for, fletched arrows. I bought no fletched arrows. They're all just shafts.
Yeah.
And then I'd cut them to the length you needed and I'd fletch them, either vanes or feathers. Price is
Right.
different for feathers because it costs more. And
Right.
then you could pick what colors you wanted. Because you go like now to Cabela's or Bass Pro and you get a set of arrows and they're all in veins and they're, two yellow and a white or an orange and white. There's same basic colors.
Right.
And if you're lucky to find in that day anything but one or possibly two different color schemes. So everybody has the same color scheme, and there's lots and lots of colors.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, well, what colors you want? You want two of one color and one of another? What do you want? And then I had those wraps that I'd put on. And generally, what I do on my hunting arrows, they got ones that's a fluorescent white.
Yep.
When you set them with the little flashlights that glow, I'd cut them in
Hmm.
half and I'd fletch my arrow because I use 4-inch feathers on mine. But
Hmm.
then below the fletching is where I'd put the wrap. A lot of them they do it clear up at the knock. Well, if you have to change fletching, you've got to cut through that as well.
Oh, it's a
And
pain.
then
Yeah.
and then if you don't glue them in the same spot, now you got a spot missing and or you cut the whole wrap off. So I just come in half, just wrap below them so I could take the fletching on and off whenever I needed.
You still
And
got the
those were
fluorescent.
Yeah. And those work really nice. There is one time I shot a deer, it ran off. I'm trying to find my arrow, can't find it. It's starting to get dark. Use my flashlight. Boom, there it is, underneath the tree. That forest part just glowed.
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
use like the Luminox or lighted Knox, because there's more than just the Luminox. There's a couple other brands, but
Yeah.
use the lighted knock, and those light really nice, unless you hit something and it knocks them out.
Right.
The first time I shot a lighted knock at a deer, I missed the deer because there was a branch I did not see, a little bitty small one. It caught that branch, and what did that knock do? It went flying out of the arrow shaft. I found
Oh
the
no.
shaft. I didn't even look for the knock because how can you find it? Because
Right.
those are the kind that only turn on when they push in.
Right.
So once it
Like
come out, it's not.
impact.
Yeah. Now, some of them, there's a button that when you shoot, it basically turns them on. You got to push it again to turn them off.
Yeah.
That I could have found, but um, I'm not even sure if they had those when I had mine.
Yeah. Back
So
with
I
I
don't
think
have any.
Luminant was the first one. It was more of an inertial one, right?
Right. It had a little wire that stuck out the side, and when you shot, it pushed the knock the rest of the way in. You had to pull it out just slightly to turn them off. And there's a little wire, and push up against the carbon shaft, and then it would turn the light on.
Yeah.
and and then they come out the ones that had a little button in there, and you when you shoot, it would push that button and turn it on, and then it would do it again and to turn it off. And that I probably could have found, but I haven't shot a lot of knocks since. Not with that wrap, I don't need them. So
Right. That's kind of nice, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. And I've done, you can kind of tailor them how you want. This one guy wanted some orange wraps, just kind of the hunter orange, and he wanted them all across all the top. So I put it on at the top and two orange fletching, two X veins, and then I forget what the other color was. But it was a bright orange. By the time you had that much orange on there, yeah, it stood out.
Not gonna lose that one.
No, and I gotta lose that one. I don't know if he ever hunted with it or not, but I made him up a dozen of them. And
I think my tournament arrows, my wood tournament arrows are they're orange like that. I just like to be able to, after I shoot the arrow, find it, or be able to look through the binoculars and see on the 3D animal where where it's stuck in the target at.
well, and last time too, you're looking at the back of the arrow, not where the impact is. So, but if you can find your arrow, you can follow where it was, where the impact was.
Exactly. Yeah.
Especially the lower poundage bows because they have a little bit more of an arc, and where the knock is generally higher than where you actually hit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But if you can
Exactly.
find it,
Exactly.
so if they're aiming at your knock, they're actually going to be high
Yeah.
because
That's
that's
right.
that's above the point you want to hit.
That's right. But especially my setup, I'm shooting a 41-pound longbow for tournaments, and there's quite a bit of arc. I'm putting the arch in archery, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, even the compounds, they're a little bit faster, but you still got a little bit of an arc in them.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, it's each bow is a little bit different. Each shooter is a
that's
little bit
right.
different, and that's what's nice is because we can tailor it to however we want. That's
That's
what's
right.
nice about, when you have your 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 arrows are fletched with whatever scheme you want. It could be in your school colors. It could be, you can have three different colors on it. You can have them all the same color. You can do whatever you want to do. You can put wraps on them. You can do the whole length wrap or half wrap, and there's so many things you could do to them to make them personal. And like the wood arrows, I see a lot of the traditional archers will actually caress their arrows,
Oh yeah, mine are
they can
crested.
spin them, and then they got each one has their own cresting pattern, and now that makes them unique.
Yeah,
And
it's
it
it's an individualized sport. That's what's cool about it. Whether you're shooting a compound or traditional bow, you can individualize things the way you like it, and that's whatever That's the fun part about it is whenever I'm shooting, the other competitors know, hey, that orange arrow's I know whose arrow that is.
yeah,
Pretty neat.
makes it really nice, and that's the thing is it's individual to you, and that's what makes it so great. And it's one of those things that have fun with it.
That's right. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be.
Right,
We're supposed to be doing this for fun, right? It's a beautiful thing. We should be enjoying it, right?
right. Well, and when I had my store, we sold a lot of the Nova bows, those beginner bows that we sold a lot of, and we did a few things to them, and we tied what one of the guys called poofa balls on there.
Yeah.
But they were, they've got the string ones that you wrap around there. No, ours, I actually, because I had bait and tackle as well, I ordered in big rolls of bass jig skirt material in multiple
Okay.
different colors, and they've got the yellows, the blues, the green, all those different colors. Well, what we'd do is we'd cut four strips, about 3 inches long, and then we'd wrap them around the string as all maybe one color or two colors for goes for it, whatever, and however we put them in is how they'd it. And then we'd tie them on with the end loop serving, tie them on really tight. We'd pull them and cut them. They'd form little balls.
Oh, that's cool.
And we'd use that for string ties. We'd put all those on all the bows. If they wanted them, we'd tie them on, and just part of selling the bow. And that's that's another thing we could do that makes it individual for the person too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and everybody has how they want the bow after they've done it long enough. They figure out how they want the bow set up, what the feeling of the bow is. There's so many things you can individualize to your own body type and what you feel comfortable with, and the looks of it too. I mean, you want to be able to look at a bow and say that's mine. Pick your bow out of a lineup. And most people, if they know you, they know which bow's yours too, because you're gonna have it decorated or
Right.
set up the way what you like.
Well, and I did on my bow case because those plain old bow cases, they're still making the exact same bow case,
Oh
and
yeah,
everybody had the same one. Well, I've got different stickers on mine. I have paintball stickers on there because I sold paintball stuff as well, and I've
right.
got all kinds of other stickers on there that nobody else would really have. The guy I hung around with a lot. He actually took the part where the deer pattern is, and he primed it and then painted that deer scene on there. So his was painted,
That's cool.
and so there's always something you can do to your case to make it different. Especially when they're still selling the exact same case.
They are. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's quite a bit more then, but it's kind of weird. I could buy those cases and get them in, but my wholesale cost was $5 less than Walmart sold them for.
Oh no,
So I wouldn't stock them.
no. You just say go
Like
to
you want to go to
Walmart.
Walmart buy them because I can't afford the space to something that I can't make any money on.
Right,
Because if I charged the same price as Walmart did on it, then I really wouldn't make any money because I got shipping as well as the
right.
cost. And, other things that come and say, oh, you're cheaper than Walmart. I'm like, well, I should really raise my prices, right? Some things I was cheaper, some things I couldn't compete with them. But I made like my bows were always, um, you could not price compare against my bows because you could go buy the bow cheaper from, Walmart or someplace else, but I'm going to charge you $40 to set it up. I'm going to charge you for shooting instruction, which included with it.
Right.
And then I'm going to have to sell you arrows and tips.
Right.
Well, all that's included with my bows. So I had one guy, it's like, call me up and see it, do it. So you can build it on, but if it's not right, you're gonna have to pay me $40 for that. Plus you're gonna need to get arrows. Plus I'm giving you a shooting instruction with it. So he said, I'm taking it back. He bought it for me. Yeah, because when it comes down to it, I provided something he couldn't get from the generic stores.
And that's what's missing in a lot of our in the big box stores. A lot of times you're missing that individualized treatment, that kind of small town approach to any, whether it be bows or whatever hardware store. I
Yeah,
can remember as a kid going to the hardware store, and it was like the central point where all the hunters would come in, and it was just like this really neat old hardware store where he sold everything, but it was also, a wealth of knowledge. And you don't get that at big box stores, right? You get your gear, but you don't get anything to go with it. Sounds like you sold a lot of stuff that went with it.
yeah. Well, and I worked at Bass after I closed my store. I worked at Bass Pro for a while. And fortunately, when I was there was three other techs in the archery department that actually knew what they was doing. We had a lot of experience. So if you'd go into that Bass Pro, you
Right,
had people that had knowledge.
right,
I left, and one of the other guys come over. I was at when I went to Cabela's before Cabela's got bought out by Bass Pro,
right.
and the guy that was the archery lead didn't really know anything about archery. I got to teach him when I got there. I'm teaching him about archery. Um, and then I left, and then John left, and then I was in there not too long ago, and the guy's like, well, he had actually applied for someplace else, and I said, we got an open in archery. He's like, well, I shot a little bit when I was a kid, so now he's working in archery. Um, I went in there one time, and this guy was looking at crossbows, and of course, I can't let him struggle. So
Right.
I'm telling about him and everything else. And it's like, he wanted to get one. So I told him, I sold a crossbow over there. You need to go down and finish the deal.
That's pretty cool. I'm sure they appreciated that too.
Yeah. Well, and the last time I was in, there's another guy who's working behind there, and he's a traditional archer. And I'm teaching him stuff too. Um, First they go in, it's like, can I help you? If I want to look at a release, like you can open the case up so I can grab that release and try it.
Yeah, there
Or
you
not,
go.
you can't. They don't know anything enough to help me out. It's like if you have the stuff I need, I know what I need.
Right.
Yeah, I know more than pretty much everybody in the archery department now. But I'm not going back to work there.
You're happy
I
doing what
make
you're doing.
yeah, I make way more money doing this than what I've been doing than I ever did at Cabela's. So
Good deal.
probably three times as much money. But
Oh, that's great, man.
well, um, what advice would you give to like a new archer that's thinking about getting into the sport?
Um, I would say for a new archer is approach it from a standpoint of it's keep it fun. Make it something that you set goals for, short-term goals. And I always tell people, if you're going to start this and you really are interested in it, think about where you are in 5 years and what it's going to take to be really good at this is about 5 years of dedication. Now, it doesn't mean you can't hunt even your first year, but approach it from a standpoint of I'm going to keep it fun. I'm going to set some long-term goals, and I'm going to I'm going to realize that this is something I can do for my entire life.
That's some good advice. Just what do you want out of it, where you want to go,
Yep.
and there's
That
always somebody out there that will help you.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of this thing is I think there are so many people that are willing to just offer some help because we've all struggled. At one point in archery, you've struggled, or with anything you've struggled, and I find that in the outdoor world, especially in archery, they're some of the most giving people. They're willing to lend a helping hand, and they're willing to truly. They want you to become a better archer, and they're there to help you.
Yeah, I was talking to one guy. He was at it in an event shooting against this guy. He was struggling. The guy he was shooting against was helping him.
There you go. Yeah, and
You know,
that's something, an encouragement. We, when you're learning how to do something, is you're not going to know it all in 5 minutes. It's going to take a
no,
while to learn it and accept the defeats and use it as motivation. If you're struggling, use it as motivation because we don't learn to be good at anything without failure, without some type of,
right?
we have to, if we're just good at it automatically, with no struggle, then it probably wouldn't be worth it. Archery is one of those things that you can tap into a superpower in the fact that you can learn that when you fail, you can learn to get up off the deck and keep moving forward, and you can apply it to other things as well.
Yeah, some good advice, and kind of the end of the show here, and I just wanted to get some last minute advice of those, and definitely appreciate all of you that are watching to this point or listening. We really appreciate it, and I know if you have any questions, get a hold of me. There's several ways to get a hold of me. Just search for my name and you can find it, and I'm sure Mike, if somebody gets reached out to you, you'd be glad to help them as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
um, just get a hold of one of us if you have questions. If you have some specific questions and need some help with, join the Arch Talk 101 Facebook group. That is, we're going to put a plug in for that because that is a place for archers to help other archers out. Uh, if you have questions or anything else, we don't allow you to sell anything in there, so you don't have to worry about getting in there and everybody trying to sell you these T-shirts or all this other stuff. Like this, that group and the other one I run. If you try and sell stuff, it gets deleted and banned. So I, it's not a selling site. It's for helping you out learning. Hence why I call it Arch Talk 101 because what's the first class you take in archery? It's generally called 101. So that's why I called it that. And, just help archers out and make sure you get in there and look at it, check it out, and ask some questions, introduce yourself, and tell us a little something about you and what you want to learn from the group. Definitely will help you out, and glad that you're on here. And it's been great talking with you, Mike. And I know our listeners have enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
It kind of the time guys goes by pretty quick when you start talking about archery and hunting and martial arts and cooking and everything else
That's
we've
right.
talked about today. So
That's
a
right.
lot of good information, and we'll definitely catch you on the next one. My name is Roy Canterbury, and I've been your host on Archery Talk 101, and been great having Mike on the phone with us, and actually on the Zoom calls. Not well, he's on his phone. I'm on laptop, but it's been
Thank
great,
you, Roy.
and definitely stay tuned for the next one. Um, I don't remember who's coming up next, but this is number 218. So we got another one coming up, and check out some of the old ones. Like I said, we got one on the whole thing on tree stand safety, and you definitely want to check that out because you know there's been a lot of hunters, and one of the things that brought up in that thing is most accidents on an archery is out of um, homemade tree stands. So check it out, and we'll catch you on the next one. And thanks for watching and listening, and we'll see you later.